Welcome to episode 57 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and this week it's been a weird round. There's been a lot of decimations, a couple of close games, but they're all decided by one specific factor, and that was clear shutdown tactics by a lot of teams. So we will pretty much just cover all of that this week, and obviously we'll preview round 9 at the end of it as well. We also have a little bit of news about Tasmania, and we'll probably touch on that first. But before I do all of that, how are you doing, Mr. Sarek?
I am not too bad, not too bad. I went on a brief little holiday. Saw a friend down in Bustleton, or 3 hours drive south of Perth, bit less. And yeah, so unfortunately I didn't get to watch many of the games. I did catch myself up on a couple of really close games to try and give it a bit of better analysis. So a bit of, a lot of the other ones are a bit surface level, but I am keen to talk about the football because, well, mostly keen. There's one game I'm not keen to talk about, but I only watch out for that. Yeah, so as I said, a bit busy, a bit tired, but I perked up a bit now, so hopefully I'll keep my energies levels up to give you all the rundown of what was round 8, I think.
Yes,
or 7.
it was round 8. I have made sure of that. We're all good. Yeah, my week as well wasn't too bad. Fairly busy. Went to the movies to see Marvel's new Thunderbolts movie. Went with some friends. It was a good time. It's actually a really good movie, surprisingly. Despite using some of the more B-list sort of characters that you wouldn't really expect to be starring front and center. It's
from what
really enjoyable.
I gather, it's like the other ragtag movie by Marvel.
Yes.
Suicide Squad.
Uh,
Yeah. It's just that with a different coat of paint or something like that.
well, Suicide Squad is DC, but yeah, it's that kind of
that explains it.
it's that kind of sort of vibe.
I'm a bit all in the same boat sort of thing.
No, that's
I know the difference between a Batman and a Superman in terms of, them, but
that's good enough. I will accept that. Yeah, just got to hang out with some friends. I did watch a fair amount of footy, so I am fairly caught up as to the happenings and the what's been going on and the all of that. But looking forward just to next week really quick. It's going to be very exciting and very busy because I will be away. It won't affect the podcast. We'll record the podcast before I leave, but I will be in Perth next week. I will get to see Cyrek once again and some of our other friends. Then I'll be up to Brisbane as well at the end of that week, which is also going to be a great time. Get to see some of my other friends that are up there. I might go to Brisbane, Melbourne. This is round 10, to be specific. If I can get a cheap ticket, I'll definitely try and make it over there to the Gabba, but otherwise, we'll see. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back over to Perth. I'm not going to sadly get to be at the footy at Optus, so that'll have to wait. But it'll be good to, see Cyrek again, as per usual.
Yeah, no, I am very much keen to see you again too, Lazy.
All right, before we jump into the games of the week, we have some brief news about Tasmania, because we actually got some updates finally, and some good ones. So, starting off with the first one, Derek Hine, who was the GM and list manager at Collingwood for about 20 years, so he worked on both of their rebuilds up to the 2010 grand final, and then obviously the 2023 grand final, which is the one that they won, I think. Yes, 2022 was Geelong, 23 was Collingwood, 24 Brisbane. Okay, we're good. He has been appointed the head of list management. He's been appointed the head of recruitment for Tasmania. So he'll be looking after the men's team, I believe. He might also be involved in the AFLW side of things, but unconfirmed for that side at this point in time. Todd Patterson, who was the recruiter and scout and academy manager at Melbourne for about 10 years between 2014 and 2024, has been appointed the head of list management and strategy. So he will be, again, pretty much the same thing, working predominantly on the men's side. Unsure if he'll have ties to the AFLW side or if they'll get an entirely different crew to do that, but that's all up in the air at this point in time. Tasmania has also pretty much still confirmed to be getting a VFL team to debut next year in 2026. It will be getting their AFLW team to debut in 2027, provided everything stays on track. And the men's team should debut in 2028. As far as we're aware, they'll be given roughly 12 first round picks, give or take, to be used either in the 2027, 28, or 29 drafts, or to be used to trade to other teams for experienced players. You know, we've seen other teams do that in the past, obviously. That's how Richmond got their bag of 8 or 9 first round draft picks, something like that. Um, and they'll probably likely be given like a huge sum of money to be able to lure out of contract players over to Tasmania as well. Any interesting thoughts on these developments?
About interesting, but I think the biggest thing is obviously looking at the two most recent examples and the list building pros of GWS and the list building banes of Gold Coast when it comes to building a club from scratch. I know location's a bit harder, especially Tasmania, it's a bit different. Gold Coast, you have the
It's
lure of the
colder as
beach life,
well, and there's also
whereas,
nothing to do down there.
yeah, Tasmania is a bit of the opposite problem. But, you know, as I said, as long as it's wise and not afraid to spend some of those picks to trade for more experienced players, like we saw GWS do, players like Chad Corns, what's his name? Heath Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember like some of the earlier ones.
There was a
Might be Camden.
few.
Nathan. No, not Nathan Bock. That was Gold Coast. Anyway, I have to look back at it one of these days. Maybe we'll look at it before that starts getting up. But you know, for now, just as a general sense,
Yeah.
you know, it'll be good to get a few years ahead of the track. Like this is a very managed entrance into the AFL. I think the Gold Coast was only probably a year and a half from announcement to actually fielding a under 17 squad, wasn't it?
It was
Wasn't that long.
yeah,
So.
it was a very short turnaround. I don't know that I
Yeah,
remember that
hopefully with a bit
much.
more time. Yeah. They'll get it a bit more right. So yeah.
And then yeah, just hopefully there's a fair chance that they will likely nab players that are from Tassie as well. Like for example,
Mm.
Seth Campbell, you know, for Richmond, he's a Tassie boy. Fair chance he might end up going back home. But granted, you know, living in Victoria, it's not that long of a trip to get to Tassie from here.
Mm.
So it'll likely be looking at other interstate players, like players in New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, WA, whether they
Yeah,
want to go home.
Southeast. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
as I said, yeah, a few here and there. None of the other stands have been touted. Alex Pierce, Colby McKercher. Um,
Pierce is a big
who's the
one.
other one?
There's a fair chance Pierce could go
Huh?
home.
Yeah, well, it just, you know, been the last couple of years, but, you know, he might be a Docker for life. He seems to like the club there, but that's not as important. It's just, you know, as long as a handful of them move, they'll be in good stead.
Yeah, great. All right, shall we jump into the week that was?
Yes, and unfortunately, we said it was a bit of a weird one. And while this game was close, it wasn't one of the floggings. Uh, it definitely wasn't a contest for the eyes, and it's been yet another tough week for North. As yet again, they are looking to end it where the last one started off, as it feels all bears repeating. 6 goal to first half for the Dons, getting out to the early lead, but North fighting bravely in a very scrappy contest and having opportunities in the last quarter to get over the line, like they did against Port Adelaide. But unfortunately, they just couldn't do it, as this game ended up at Marvel Stadium, ending in 9-11-65 for the Bombers, 9-8-62 for North Melbourne. And I think it's a bit hard because, you know, the first quarter sort of showed some of the problems that they've had with their inside midfield group,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of the turnovers from their midfield, both restricting the time of possession that they have, and also losing the clearance, setting up their opponent's attacks. It was pretty much 10 minutes to forget for North's Melbourne's inside midfielder. But after that, they weren't too bad. You know, as I said, Essendon were able to find their handball chains early to distribute, went out very quickly. But after those first 10 minutes, yeah, North Melbourne's shape got a bit better, and it turned out into a very even contest. It's just for them, those 6 goals to 2. Sorry. I think that was 6 goals to 2 first quarter for the Dons.
I think
I
that's
meant to say
correct. Yeah.
earlier. Yeah. So those 6 goals to 2 just proved a bit much in the end. As I said, North Melbourne got their defences in place, prevented a lot of Essendon's outside movement from getting anywhere, and the inside movement was very spotty from there on in. So yeah, it would just be a slow, scrappy contest. North getting back into the contest, but unfortunately, just not enough. Yeah, and as I said, you do have to give credit to North's game. It's just I think uh sorry, what I was gonna say is that yeah, as I said, their outside game this week was actually a lot better uh than in a lot of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Probably even better than the Dons, to be honest. And as I said, like a lot of their wingers have improved a bit this year. Like it's still not good, but it's definitely probably above 18th, which I placed them last year.
Yeah.
Um, and as I said, a lot could be like said about Sheasel's game, especially this one. Like depending on what media outlet you read, either they're completely right and Harry Sheasel's a scrub, or he had a fairly good game. But you know what I mean? It was like no matter what, because he had a few turnovers, a lot of I think it was like one contested possession
Mm-hmm.
for the game. But at the end of the day, like North's halfback movement to the wing was overall better. And if Sheasel being there was a part of that, uh, I think it was an overall net positive. As I said, Dylan Stevens got into the game a bit. Dersma, Zane Dersma, I should say, the brother of Xavier, who plays for the
Yes.
Dons, um, both generated like a lot of, well, Stevens with distribution, Dersma for like sharp burst plays. And yeah, as I said, there was a bit of improvement there. I just wanted to highlight that because I have knocked North's outside movement. But yeah, as I said, the other bad thing about this game is unfortunately the defensive effort for North was very, very good. Pretty good for Essendon as well. But as I said, due to just the hard running of North, they did not let a transition offense go into deep inside 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Hardiman and McDonald for North Melbourne had really great game. And no one in this whole contest lost a one-on-one battle. So, although both teams are a bit mediocre in this, North more so, I still think it was a bit win. And although it meant, although North Melbourne lost in terms of marks inside 50,
Mm-hmm.
Essendon managed a few more. They were very tougher shots. So, again, they pushed out the Dons enough and did enough to keep them at a very competitive score. It's just another week where, yeah, their forward line just didn't fire enough. Obviously, Paul Curtis was a bit gloss. Some North players will say if he was playing, they probably would have won this. Whether that's the case or not, it's hard to tell. But, on the flip side, with the injuries to the Dons, losing a bit of steam, all these things that were going towards North Way. And, yeah, it's just unfortunate they couldn't get the win because, it's I wouldn't say they deserved it, but they definitely felt like one of those last 2 matches should have been a win.
Yeah.
And
Agree.
while you might see that as a criticism of North, like at the same time, you can also just be unlucky occasionally. Because again, they still for the majority time have had good work in their forward line. It just hasn't quite gelled. Like the Dons did okay defensively, but they weren't like masterclassing North. It's just yeah, as I said, there was a few opportunities where players missed, and yeah, as I said, uh, Essendon end up taking home this victory.
They did. It was yeah. It's a game where North 100% probably should have taken a little bit more of their opportunities. Where they definitely would have gotten the upper hand against Essendon a lot more, and might have been able to squeak out the win. But it's just one of those games. Like despite Essendon's injuries and where they started like to really struggle around the ground, North just couldn't capitalize. They just didn't have enough legs or enough pressure to be on the ball to be able to take advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, is like it wasn't exactly like the flashiest game. Like I know I said like outside movement was all right for North, the inside movement. You know what I mean? Like, it just wasn't generating enough. And I said the only bit of easy scoring was what I said earlier with Essendon in that first 10 minutes. And again, that's what ended up deciding the game because North probably only marginally, but for the other three quarters, probably did better. Um, Second quarter was a bit of a weird one. Essendon had a lot of territory dominance, but
Mm-hmm.
kicked themselves out of it. But yeah, as I said, for the rest, yeah, North felt like they had the upper hand, and yeah, probably should have stuck claims on this game. Didn't go back to the drawing board, but at least they've provided back-to-back contests with competitive matches. You know, like I know the win is imperative. They need to start winning again, but you know, in the absence of that, they can at least take that away from this game.
Yeah, they at least know that they're somewhat on the right track. They're just still learning about, especially if you're saying that, their movement off of halfback and their pace along the out deck, their outer game is a lot better, at least this week.
Yeah,
Then there's at least some sort of positive signs coming out of this game.
yeah, because there wasn't like that many opportunities. There was still like they're getting it forward. There wasn't too much conversion, but the ones they did, they were able to get fairly accurate scores from it.
Mm.
They got 6-1 from halfback, 37. So it's only 7 scoring shots compared to the 2-7 of Essendon's. I think that was partially like the inaccuracy of Essendon was how hard North were defending in their back line.
Mm-hmm.
They were fairly disciplined. Had a few better matchups than they have against other oppositions. So yeah, at least I got that to go with. Like, it's been ages since I've seen a North game and said, yeah, that's probably a pass level for defense.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fair assessment, especially with a lot of the games they've had over the past couple of years, where their defense has always just been their worst part. Like it's a definitely a right track
Yeah,
improvement. They're not exactly obviously
exactly.
where we want them to be, but they're getting there.
Mm, exactly. You know,
Especially
it's
when
a
you
bit,
when you
yeah,
have a player like Charlie Comben, for an example, who's stepped up a lot in like the past month or so.
yeah. Well, I would actually say the opposite. I would say, like, you know, some of the iffier, you know, some of the maturer players that, you know, they've picked up, not big name recruits, but you know, like yeah, Aiden Cause, well, not so much a recruit, but like McDonald.
Mm.
There's another one I'm trying to think of, but yeah. As I said, you know, it's yeah, just good to see that starting along. But as I said, unfortunately, the flip side was just yeah, as I said, the offensive dominance. Like yeah, as I said, Jack Darling, you know, he's been an okay recruit and he's bringing the ball to ground, but yeah, I said this week, without a oh, we said his name before. The one who got robbed out, you know, at the feet.
Oh, Paul
They
Curtis,
just weren't
yeah,
getting enough. Yeah, Paul Curtis. They just weren't getting enough at ground level.
yeah, that's right.
It was a lot of set shots in this game.
Yeah, it's really rough that it does actually show that they do rely on him in the forward line. If obviously they can't get it to Larky, for an example, to take
Mm,
apart from the week before's performance where he just missed the easiest shots of his life.
yeah.
He's the more reliable kick if it's on a set
Mm,
shot. But if it's ball to ground, normally it's Paul Curtis, and without him, there's just not enough conversion up on the floor.
yeah, Zer's more of the like marking lead sort of small forward. I feel like Castante's heading that way. Like he's not so much a crummer, but um yeah, as I said, for his smaller size, he does get a few marks and lead ups.
Mm,
So yeah, and then again, it's like asking the questions of Luke Parker, like, do you play him in the forward line in these cases? Try and get him on the ground level. But, you know, as I said, when their midfield was sort of needing a bit of that bolster, obviously losing Wardlaw before the game was a blow.
yeah.
Um, yeah, they just couldn't get the players in the positions they needed, but they weren't far off it.
No, it's good that they're still what trudging along, but in a more positive direction than a negative direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you go through the individual stats, obviously Essendon had a few, but North will have a few players that they can hold their head high after this match.
Agreed. So I am starting with Essendon, of course, and I will start with Captain Zach Merritt. As he normally does, he pretty much did everything to keep the Bombers in it, which thank goodness, because everyone would have lost a tip in that case. But he finished with 35 disposals, 26 of them effective, equating to 74.3% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 7 marks, 8 inside 50s, 5 clearances are behind, 9 score involvements, 23 pressure acts, 12 ground ball gets, and 490 metres gained. Youngster Archie Perkins was the leading scorer for the game. He kicked 3-1 from 15 touches, 12 of them contested, equating to 80% efficiency, 6 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 6 score involvements, 17 pressure acts, and 352 metres gained. And then Will Setterfield led with pressure for the Dons. He collected 21 disposals, 16 of them effective, equating to 76.2% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 6 marks, 4 clearances, 3 score involvements, 9 tackles, and 26 pressure acts. Jumping over to North Melbourne, Tristan Sherry dominated the ruck, considering they're relying on Goldstein, who, can only do so much at his age, and that they don't have anyone else at the moment. So Sherry finished with 39 hitouts, 13 to advantage, and 25 disposals, 16 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 10 clearances, 7 score involvements, 4 tackles, 13 pressure acts, and 6 ground ball gets. And then Tom Powell performed admirably, we believe, finishing with 28 touches, 10 contested possessions, 6 clearances, 3 score involvements, 9 tackles, 16 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. Also want to give a shout out to debutant Finbar Malley, who kicked 1-1 from 8 disposals, 5 contested possessions, 3 marks. All of them were contested marks. 2 of them were inside 50. 2 inside 50s overall, 3 score involvements, 2 tackles, both of them also inside 50, 2 1%ers, and 2 spoils.
Yeah, and that's also like someone who I probably could have mentioned with those marks inside 50. Like he looked like to be a little of a good little lead up player. Probably not who they needed at that moment, but yeah, I don't think Northwest has too many of those crumbing forwards. So considering probably not exactly who they wanted in, I thought he did very well in his debut.
Yeah, completely agree. Over to the injury front, and Essendon take more of a hit with Jordan Ridley suffering another hamstring issue. I think he seems to be very injury prone at this point in time. I feel like they need to give him more of a rest,
Yeah.
considering how many he's had over the past couple of months already. Harry Jones, I think it might have just been a rolled ankle, but we'll find out when, I guess, more.
No, Harry Jones, that was the one that had the full separation.
Oh, was it? I didn't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, so he basically rolled it, but it was off the ligament that joins it to ankle.
Oh,
So
yeah, okay, so it's not just
it
the
was
basic rolled ankle.
essentially, yeah, it was rubber foot, basically.
That's
If you're squeamish, don't look at the highlights, but if you do have like that perverted sort of interest, it was interesting to look at.
noted. Okay, so he's gonna be out for a while. Jade Gresham with a
Probably a month-ish.
groin concern. He's been doing pretty well so far this season. I think he's only been out once with a minor issue, so hopefully this is only another minor. And then Jackson Archer, he had a hamstring complaint. I think it was a little bit later in the game. He only just came back from injury as well, so hopefully it's not too bad. But he has looked fairly good so far since he has come back.
Yeah, so this was actually in the second quarter. And yeah, it was a bit of a half and half because, yeah, he wasn't that involved in the game. And then he he was very much struggling to walk. So it's a bit up in the air whether he was actually maybe a bit sore coming into it and chose to roll the dice and it just didn't work out for him. Or maybe this was just a freak thing on a pretty quiet game. But yeah, either way, a bit disappointing.
Yeah, it's really unlucky. Over to the MRO front, only one report for the game, with Mason Redmond fined $3,750 for rough conduct against Finn O'Sullivan. Considering it's only a fine, I don't think it was too much malice or anything in it. It probably might have just been like a high tap, something like that.
And I'm trying to think I can remember it, but I don't think I can.
I couldn't find any footage of it specifically, so I don't think it was super bad. But that brings us to the end of Thursday's game, so let's jump over to Friday's game, also at Marvel Stadium, for St Kilda and Fremantle.
Yeah, I must admit, if you had like a pre-weekend pass to Marvel Stadium, I probably would be asking for a refund because, as I said, Essendon Bombers, like it was competitive, but it was definitely not pretty to watch. where this was legitimately one of the worst first half of footballs I've watched in a long time. Freo just mucked around with ball in hand. And whilst the Saints did score a few easy turnover goals early on, they generated little else. The second half had the second quarter, I should say, had 24 minutes with only a fast Freddy behind to show for it. So, well, again, you could say it was a strong defensive showing by both teams. And especially for Fremantle, I think by halftime, Pierce, Cox, and Ryan were leading the Supercoach scores.
Mm-hmm.
So you could tell where a lot of the possession was just hanging around. However, there was an abysmal showing for the Fremantle Dockers mids, coupled by a Hayden Young injury, which just meant they just broke down defensively, just conceding so much inside and outside movements, smashed in the clearances, smashed on the outside. And in the second half, when movement got a bit freer, as I said, Freo's defense tended to nosedive a bit. Saints capitalized. Keeper Sharman got off the chain. Caminiti got more involved. Only kicked a goal, but sort of involved in a lot more play. And Machido Owens got a few opportunities, which he converted pretty well. Whereas for Freo, they only had, 4 goals? I'll say the score now because there's not much to go through. 14-10-94, St Kilda to only 5-3-33. Dockers, that's a 61-point win to the Saints and a lot of percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as I said, Amos, he got a couple of cheapies, but that was really it for getting the top fours on the scoreboard. Everything else was just very opportunistic for not much generation for Freo. It was one of those lopsided clearances showings I saw, not just of the actual numbers themselves, but for the quality. But yeah, I mentioned last week that Freo had sort of dropped off from being last year's clearance kings. But yeah, this was like way abhorrent, as the 5 centre clearances by Jack McRae equaled the total number of centre clearances for Fremantle during the match, who normally average 12. To be fair, there was only 23 centre bounces. Obviously, less goals meant less opportunities, but they got beaten 37-17 in the general clearances.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after Sarong, who won a lot of the ball, didn't have that much impact. It was actually Murphy Reed, the youngster, who was the next best clearance winner for Freo. So, and I also just want to put a point, and this is sort of like a semi-in-depth point, and it's about Sean Darcy. And I think we've seen this year a lot of ruckmen getting very involved in the clearance games. And we know how quality Sean Darcy is with his tapping.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of clearances, like the average top ruckman get a clearance about 1 every 10 centre bounces. Darcy is the league lowest for first choice ruckman with a centre clearance in 1 in every 80 centre clearances, and is in around the middle of the pack when it comes to stoppage clearance possessions.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, couple that with the woes of Freo's shape against St Kilda, it also goes to show that, how valuable it is having that ruckman that is able to win the ball. Because, as I said, both ruckmen didn't really have that much of an impact in this game. And when that happened, as I said, Saints just feasted because they were great at ground ball. They were tackling the heck out of Freo. So even when they did win the ball, they only converted just over half of their first possessions to clearances, which is actually the lowest number I could find this year. So yeah, again, after halftime, it was a smashing. No ability to stop movement inside or out for Freo.
Yep.
Got swallowed by the Saints defense when it did go forward. And, as I said, Saints could be accused of being so up and down. But it was very good to see them bounce back after looking very scattered against Brisbane. Whereas, yeah, Freo just had a coach, fan, and player killer, I think. Very disappointing. I have seen today that Caleb Sarong has given Justin Longmuir full support of the board, which is, I don't know if that's dangerous. I don't know whether that means he's getting sacked this week. I don't know how how different it is when a player is getting it. But yeah, you can see that this sort of loss is like, it becomes a bit more than what actually happened on field. It
Yeah,
really
it
felt like
does.
a belief stopper more than any of the other losses Fremantle have got this year.
Yeah, agreed. And it's fair credit to St Kilda. They had lost 3 matches in a row coming into this, so
Mm.
it was kind of expected for them, even though I didn't tip it and I probably should have. It was kind of expected for them to have a really strong bounce back in this game, especially at home. But like Freo, just there was just nothing there. There was like
Mm.
hardly anyone really had a stellar performance. I really struggled to really signify like a handful of players that really stood out apart from their key defenses, which only held up for a
Mm.
half. So it was like,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and that's the other disappointing thing too, is like the Saints in the first half, they let Frio sort of hang around. You know what I mean? Like even they could have taken a few more advantages. And
hmm,
as I said, this could have been one thing where you know after a half, you could imagine, oh, the best team normally responds. But yeah, the best team was just the Saints. Like they got the lead and patched up, which is pretty strong signs. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you're leading but not going that well, you tend to repeat bad habits. But
mm-hmm.
no, they patched up very nicely. It was very mature of them.
Yeah, they really managed to balance out, shut down Freo via all of their pretty much all of their avenues, and just
Yeah, it
responded
was.
pretty convincingly to great effect because it shows on the scoreboard.
Mm.
So we'll jump over to our individuals. I'm going to start with St Kilda's defense, going with Cal Wilkie, who was pretty important. Finishing with 24 disposals, 20 of them effective, equating to 83.3% efficiency. 5 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 14 marks, 7 score involvements, 3 tackles, 3 on percenters, and 2 spoils. Hugo Garcia, after getting dropped very early in the game last week, he played his best game for the club so far, I think. Kicking a goal from 19 touches, 9 contested possessions, 2 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 3 score involvements, 10 tackles, 19 pressure acts, 5 ground ball gets, and 309 meters gained. And then Cooper Sharman almost outscored the Dockers on his own, which would be a first for a long time for the Saints, kicking 4-2 from 16 disposals, 6 contested possessions, 9 marks with 5 of them inside 50, 3 inside 50s, 8 score involvements, 13 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. Shout out also to debutant Hugh Boxall. I thought he had already debuted, but turns out he didn't. It was one of the practice games, I think, is where we last mentioned
Mhm.
him. Um, he finished with 16 touches, 10 contested possessions, 3 marks, 4 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 6 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. Jumping over to Fremantle, Corey Wagner is probably one of the few as well who could stand up tall for the Dockers. He collected 13 disposals, 10 of them effective, equating to 76.9% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 3 intercepts, 3 intercept possessions, I should specify. 3 inside 50s, 3 score involvements, 16 tackles with 3 of them inside 50, 24 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. Um, Alex Pearce, as you had mentioned before as well, performed admirably down back upon returning from injury, finishing with 18 touches, 16 of them effective, equating to 88.9% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 6 marks, 4 of them contested and 4 of them intercept, 3 inside 50s, 3 tackles, 10 pressure acts, 5 1%ers, and 4 spoils.
I do have to correct you. You're confusing your long-haired players. That was Luke Jackson that came back from injury. Alex Pearce
Oh yeah, it
gets played
was.
every
You
game
are
this year.
correct.
But no, as
Silly
I
me.
said, I get you. Look, they do. It's weird. They do look similar, but like also, I feel like Luke Jackson. Oh, sorry, Alex Pearce is if Luke Jackson got lost in the woods for about a month.
Yeah,
That's
that's an accurate description, I think.
yeah. I don't think what needs to be said. I think that's just it. Yeah, Jackson actually did okay pinch hitting because again, I thought, unfortunately, I did think that Darcy sort of lowered his colours, but yeah, I think it was very much a nil-all ruck contest. Not much excitement was being generated from the direct touches, so a lot
Yeah,
of it working on ground level.
and
So I
Rowan
thought Luke
Marshall,
Jackson.
whilst I think he beat them both somewhat convincingly. He also didn't really do all that much around the ground either, so it was kind of just a midfield work rate rather than a ruckman work
Yeah.
rate.
As I said, Jackson was like the only ruckman that did get like a few direct hand-off touches, I feel. So, yeah, didn't have the greatest game, but I was talking to my dad afterwards because in the West Australian, Danielle Laidley, I haven't looked at it, but she normally gives a rating to between 1 and 10
Oh yeah,
for all the Eagles and Fremantle players. And yeah, as I said, I think Corey Wagner might be the only 5 this week. I wouldn't give anyone more than a 5. And I think Alex Pearce, he could have been a 5. I feel like he did drop off defensively in the last, but um, everything he did that before was actually good.
yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't really name any other player that really deserved to be around just an average game. Really, it was a pretty much all round
Yeah, I figured
bad performance from
the
the Dockers.
16 tackles that Wagner laid was probably a worthwhile mention. That's why he was on the list
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
anything else.
He tried hard, and for like a young, you know what I mean, for a young star who isn't really known for his like dangerous distributions and all that sort of stuff. Um, yeah, like that is like a bit worrying that he stood out of all of that.
Mm.
But you could definitely tell from go to woe, he was pretty much trying all night.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Over on the injury front, as you mentioned before, Hayden Young did a hamstring, specifically his right one. I don't know if it's been like a pressing issue over the past couple of months on his
I think
hamstrings.
it's different to the left, the one that he injured before season. So
Okay. So hopefully it's not too bad though, but it's not looking ideal at this point in time for him. And Matthias Filippo was a late change for the Saints. There was no stated reason. Maybe he just needed a rest,
mm,
or he just pulled up
well,
like sore, or they just needed a change. But
yeah. I mean, if he was going to play at sub, it literally would have had no effect on the game because the Saints didn't use their sub. The exact opposite of last week.
yeah, I know it was weird.
Uh,
But yeah, so I figured that was worth a mention. If he plays next week, then I'm sure it might have just been like a rest sort of thing. But obviously, we
yeah,
can wait and see. And then for the MRO, there's a couple. Rowan Marshall was fined $3,750 for tripping Murphy Reed. Andy Brayshaw was fined $1,000 for tripping Max Hall. And Matthew Johnson was fined $1,000 for, you guessed it, contact with an umpire.
yeah. Oh, I know. But back on the sub for a little second. You're hired by St Kilda on their list.
Mm-hmm.
You sit on the sub bench for the whole game. What are you thinking of during the entire match? Like your team's easily winning.
I just
There's
I
not much to
I
dissect
just want
on
to play.
field.
That'd be all you'd be thinking. He's like, I just want to be out there
Yeah.
running around,
I
win
don't
or
know. Do you
lose.
like start a little meditation session? Do you like just you don't mess hope that Ross says, yeah, we're not actually going to use the
Well,
sub, head down and just do like
if you're listed as a
some,
sub player but don't actually touch the ground, does that count as a game
yeah.
played?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay. Well,
So he
that's
won't get his stats wrong
fortunate
by
then.
that. But yeah.
You
I don't
don't
know.
really
It's
want
just
that
like,
kind of
I don't know.
blemish on
Like
your
you
numbers.
don't have any like mobile phones or anything. So maybe they just need like a few Sudoku books if you're gonna not use a sub,
I don't think they're
Just
allowed to really
am
give
I
anything to
thinking?
the players. I think they just have to watch.
Maybe. I guess so. Yeah, okay. Maybe they can't get illegal Sudoku. I don't know. Just seems a bit boring. But
Yeah,
at the
if you
same
enjoy
time,
watching the footy, I feel like it's not too bad. But if you're having to sit there and do nothing, it's
watching a Saints game? Ugh.
yeah. I mean, true.
I shouldn't say that. They did good they did good.
As someone who has
Anyway.
seen many a Saints game in person now, it does feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh
But they did better than another team who played on Saturday in
they
Ballarat.
they did. And I don't know how much you really want to talk about this one, but we're gonna jump over to it being the Bulldogs and Port Adelaide over in Ballarat.
Yeah, well, fortunately for me, this is when my breakdown sort of sorting a bit, because I only got to watch the first half of this game, which, to be fair, was actually not that uncompetitive. It was still a masterclass by the Bulldogs in how to play in windy conditions. That was, of course, Ballarat. I think I mentioned that before. The game started off with Port getting the use of the breeze to gain territory. But from the word go, the Dogs' defense was just set up for the long dump kick. They beautifully defended, utilizing Rory Lobb to full advantage, just pinched the ball back. And despite having to kick into the breeze themselves, they sort of, it was weird because they didn't play chip markers like a full style. Like their marking wasn't like through the roof, but they were taking marks in good area and it was very efficient ball use. And they only really started that forward launch when they had enough territory to get the ball in deep, which was very much the difference because when Port were trying to move the ball against the wind, they were almost trying to kick the leather off the Sharon. They were just, they were possibly even harder trying to kick it. You say all about kicking hard to try and, let the breeze take it and all that, but I feel like Port were just trying a bit too hard with the win against. And they just had so many clangers in this game. There was a bit in the second half where they tried to lower their eyes, and they were actually doing a bit better, but the damage was done because after that, a small lead sort of tumbled into a massive one. Port looked defeated after halftime. And yeah, this was just a classic Bulldogs beatdown. After last year where they got smashed in possessions and lost the Bulldogs, they gave Port one back, absolutely dominating the possessions clearances in the inside 50s. And yeah, there's not actually too much to say about the Bulldogs because this was like so academic of their wins. And as I said, it is very familiar for Port, but it bears repeating that, Port Adelaide, they can win against good opposition, but only if they have the tools to outmuscle them. So it isn't a case, if it isn't the case, it's sort of like Goodnight Nurse, as they themselves sort of become their best avenue for opponent attack. As I said, those long kicks were just setting up the Bulldog. He scored fairly well from the back half, fairly well from turnovers. And again, as I said, a lot of those turnovers were generated from back half and midfield users for Port. And while, as I said, it wasn't helped by the lack of around the ground options, Port's forwards did press up to try and give them targets, but they just weren't getting utilized to their best advantage. It was all terrible one-on-one contests, or sorry, not just one-on-one contests, but like pack mark contests, two-on-one contests. That just resulted in either bowl-ups or easy out of bounds, where the Bulldogs were set up incredibly. Talking a bit more about the Bulldogs, they definitely need a bit of a gas up. The players, we talked about the absences for the Bulldogs for so long, and now they've gotten a few players back, but we continue to see the skill level of some of these mid-level players. Joel Freer, Sam Davidson, Scott West, Buku Karmas, Matt Kennedy, all had impacts. It wasn't just all left to the Bont, Treloar, and Libba, who still had fantastic games. It was very much their game. It was hard contest, a lot of ground ball gets. It suited them, but with all those players around them, it just made them be a force to be reckoned with. It was clinical. Like, this was an elite performance by the Bulldogs, because we're talking about how they've had honourable wins, honourable matches, when they've had a few injuries lost. We've talked about them have some very solid wins, but this was like last year when we saw the Bulldogs get all cylinders firing, where they just look near untouchable.
Yeah, no, completely agree. This was a performance by the Dogs, while for the most part expected, especially because it was down in Ballarat. But the sheer fact that it was a 90-point deficit between, 90-point margin, I should be more specific, just shows that how well set up the Dogs have become, and even in the absence of some key players like Sam Darcy, they're just making things work. And whilst I do mention Tim English for an example, not to mention Aaron Norton and Bontempelli both performed really well when they pushed forward or played predominantly forward. The fact that they're able to gel so well even without pretty much their number one key forward, it shows how much depth up in their forward line they're able to they're able to bring in or are able to switch up. Like, for example, and I do mention this as well in my individuals, but Rory Lobb shuffled back into defense, and
Mm.
that still gave them plenty of options of bounce off of halfback as well as plenty of forward pressure, midfield transition. It would all just worked out.
Yeah, and it's too like, and even you can argue like it's 1 and 2 that they're missing. Depending on how you want to judge Jamari Ugle-Hagan
I think at
versus
this
Norton
point
as their number 2.
it's relevant to the season.
Well, relevant to the season, you wouldn't expect him back, like the way things are going. But you know what I mean? It's like you could consider it that way. And either way, it's still that list spot that they've used to develop it. So, as I said, I know that they've got a lot of options up forward, but again, it's mainly just Norton, a fairly relatively criticized player, especially when it's forced into those individual contests. But he's stood up enough, and he's got so much people around him where it's not about these individual players. It's just about good forward half press. And again, I mentioned last week that the Bulldogs might just be like a bit of a lesser Brisbane when it comes to the forward half press, but
Mm-hmm.
I reckon Brisbane would be absolutely chuffed if they set up their forward half game like this game.
Yeah, it was a really, really well structured by the Dogs, and I think this is a sort of team structure overall that I think they could actually push them pretty far against their opponents for
Mm,
the next couple of weeks. Because off the top of my head, I think they've got still a couple tough opponents on the way going into the
yeah.
bye. So if they're able to knock off wins against them, that secures them for a really strong second half.
Yeah, like honestly, even if they're just like, if they're 1 or 2 wins above even, I reckon they could be a top 4 chance. Just with the how many Melbourne-based games are in their second half of the season.
Mm.
So
Very
it should
limited
pull them in good
travel will
stead.
100% help them out,
Mm,
and like as we've already seen, like the top four is still very very much up in the air. Apart from
mm.
Brisbane and like maybe Geelong, like there aren't really any sort of teams that are like a definite top four chance right now.
Geelong aren't really like they're sitting at 21-17. I think
Oh yeah, Collingwood's probably
Brisbane
a
just so
slightly better chance in that case.
yeah, like Brisbane you're thinking definite, but the rest are all a bit speculative. And even then, like Brisbane won 14%, top of the ladder. Like that's very low for a top place. Like if it wasn't for the fact that they were last year's grand finalists, you wouldn't be exactly
Yeah, that's
locking
exactly
them
right.
in. So
And it's the
as
fact
I
that
said, it should be a pretty
majority of their
open
wins have
top
come
4.
from such close games is why they still have such a lower
Mm,
percentage. But I mean, 4 points will get you to the top, and that's what they've been doing so far.
exactly. So,
Um,
but yeah, as I said, door definitely ajar for the Bulldogs. Absolutely less so for Port Adelaide. As I said, they just feel like a team that at best are battling for the 8 at the moment. So, while this isn't irredeemable, they're playing a lot of young kids at the moment. Um, this was just really disappointing in the sheer drop of effort after halftime, equivalent to the Fremantle loss, really.
yeah,
Like, those were the two really big disappointing last halves of football this week.
yeah, I
And you know
completely
what I
agree.
mean? It's like, obviously, Port's coaching position isn't on the line or anything, but like, I feel like as weeks go on, they become less and less of a legitimate threat uh, for the deep end of this year's season.
Yeah, especially against a lot of the stronger teams, they're not lining up to be as much of a damaging opposition as someone I hope to
Mm,
believe, especially with the kinds of players that they do actually have and how incredible some of those players actually are. That's not going to get
mm.
you the whole way.
Yeah, exactly. We're still finding the mix of the lower end. And the only plus side is it's not the same players every week, sort of thing. We have some good kids that have really good games. Even some of the new ones, like Joe Richards, I thought was very important in the first half.
Hmm.
Um, I think there was someone who was watching that. Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, Will Lorenz. He comes into the side. Honestly, has a pretty decent game. Um, but you know what I mean. As I said, then we have a good mix of veterans and younger kids all having very subpar games.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Jordan Sweet as well is starting to actually drop off. It's sort of like Soldo was at the beginning of last year, so it might actually be avenues for a change in the ruck position. I think that
I'm
might be
praying. I would love to
slowly
see.
creeping
I
up.
would love to see my Richmond boy back in your ruck list.
I mean, maybe. I mean, it could even be Dante Vicentini if he's not up to snuff. So we've got a few players. You would hope that, you know, with opportunity, um, they get chances because, yeah, as I said, it's not quite happening. It's not the right mix, and
Hmm.
you don't want to change it too much and become really inconsistent. But yeah, as I said, I think we've also just got to be a bit bold and like realize. Like, I think there's already a bit of realization that we can't just play all of our older players. We've blooded through pretty well, but it's just finding that right mix and still holding our mid tier players accountable without completely destroying our structure.
Yeah, agreed. Jumping over to our individuals, as I mentioned before, Team English is top of my list. He was very impressive around the ground, getting 30 hitouts with 11-2 advantage and kicking 3 goals 1 from 27 disposals, 20 effective according to 74.1% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 6 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 3 goal assists, 17 score involvements, 11 pressure strikes, and 345 meters gained. Brief shout outs also, as I mentioned before, to Aaron Norton and Marcus Bontempelli for also kicking 3-1. Like that's a pretty solid tall dominance right there. That's 9 goals
It
3 between the
is.
three of them.
But I think your next point is also like crazy. The fact that Marcus Bontempelli, really good game, 3 goals 1, doesn't even get your midfield mention.
No, it went to Ed Richards this week. The lovable ginger lad, as he is. He was very clean with ball transition. He kicked 2-1 from 30 touches, 24 effective, equating to 80% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 5 marks, 11 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 9 score involvements, 20 pressure acts, 5 1 percenters, 8 ground ball gets, and 729 meters gained. And as I mentioned before, Rory Lobb, he shuffled back into defense as the Dogs were able to fill their forward line once again, despite still missing Sam Darcy, of course. And he was very solid and composed, finishing with 11 touches, 9 of them effective, according to 81.8% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 3 marks, all of them being intercept marks, 2 score involvements, 9 1 percenters, 7 spoils, and 100% time on ground, because I don't think he really had to do all that much.
Yeah, well, he actually dropped off once the ball started getting in the stopped getting in the forward half. So it was almost a position of sometimes he rests in the forward line. He actually had the benefit of resting in the back line.
There was, speaking of just fun moments like that, there was a time, this is back in, I think 2017, Richmond were playing Fremantle, and I think we were playing them over there. Uh, I think because I think Optus was being used at the time.
Opposite. Yeah.
So yeah, we were playing Fremantle over there. This is when Freo wasn't all that good. I'm not going to say in comparison to now because I think Freo was slightly better than what they were back then. Um, and like we were our forward line and our midfield was just completely dominating Freo to the point where Alex Rance just kind of wafted into the forward line and kicked a couple of goals.
Yeah. I mean, you get that. Sometimes it's like I feel like the positional changes. Sometimes they come when you're like either doing really, really good or really, really badly.
Yeah. Plus,
So
and you don't want
especially tall positionals.
like your players to just like, well, I wouldn't say quote unquote freeze up and not be like as warm
Yeah, I get. Yeah,
and
if
prepped.
for Rans to get touches, you got to put him in the forward line. I get
It's
you.
not necessarily touches, just like staying warmed up, staying like your
Yeah,
body's just not going to stop on you, sort of thing. Um,
yeah, I get you.
Jumping over to Port Adelaide, there was at least one player that I thought performed well, and that was Logan Evans. He collected 14 touches, 13 effective, according to 92.9% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 4 tackles, 10 pressure strikes, 2 1 percenters, 7 ground ball gets, and 336 meters gained. Overall, it was a fairly average game from pretty much everyone, including Butters and Rosie. They
Yeah,
might have had the better numbers, but I thought Evans was slightly more consistent with his usage.
yeah. I think Butters is still like the best player on ground, but yeah, as I said, I think that's where like everyone's saying, "Oh, Connor Rosie like master stroke off halfback," and to a point, I do agree, but you got to realize is that you're sort of minimizing his biggest flaws,
Mm.
which is ball use and ball distribution. And in a game like this, which was sort of highlighting his worst faults of just burning the ball long, and he wasn't the only one. We had a classic Asava Radicalia
Yes.
messing up an uncontested kick. No pressure to lead to a Bulldogs goal, but yeah, as I said, Raisley, it just was like very much the classic, just kicking the ball long rather than kicking the ball usefully.
Yeah.
And as I said, like that's the biggest thing with Raisley. He needs to work on his decision making. And although halfback will get him in a position where a lot of the decisions should be a lot more straightforward, he's still got to keep it in mind because, as I said, it's not just a magic cure-all button. He's still got avenues in his game which he's going to work on, and he probably should. Like, I'm not doubting the fact that he's probably honing his craft as we speak. He'll probably know of some of it, but
Oh yeah, 100%.
yeah, as I said, it was just highlighted very apparently that, as I said, that wasn't just like a master switch move that fixes all of Port's problems. Port still have a fair few problems. Don't you worry, Blazy.
I'm not worrying.
Don't
I know
you
this for a
worry.
fact.
Yeah.
Thankfully, there is nothing on the injury front as far as like the match report was concerned. We'll wait to see on the injury list to see if anyone is added. But in terms of the MRO, there are 3 rulings with Connor Rozee being fined $1,000 for striking Latham Vandermeer. Mitch Georgiades fined $3,750 for rough conduct against James Harms. Thankfully, it doesn't look too bad because there was nothing on the injury list, so hopefully it's all good. And then Will Rioli was fined $1,000 for striking Bailey Dale, which has apparently become an ongoing issue off field.
Yeah.
We won't really go into details on that, but if you're in the know, you're in the know, and it's a little concerning.
Well, we'll put it this way: it resulted in a public post, which I was the only thing. That was the only thing I saw after the weekend. I was like, "Oh, that's not bad." But then you realize, oh, there was also like a private message sent, and you're like, Unfortunately, Willie Rioli off field hasn't had the best moments in terms of decisions that could have been thought about.
Correct.
So hopefully this is just something that was, maybe just something you would rather regret posting in terms of not serious, but shouldn't have sent rather than anything untowards. And if it is untowards, he should get penalised accordingly.
100%. Now, if you're in South Australia, you obviously primarily you probably go for one or two South Australian teams. And if you're, the other primary South Australian team, you're very glad the Port Adelaide lost and your team won against Carlton at the Adelaide Oval.
Exactly, and it was very emphatic. I mentioned last week I sort of put him on the grill. Adelaide's midfield. I said it was probably the line that put him on the back foot the most against Fremantle. And it was the mirror image this week. Adelaide's midfield was the line that set them up at first touch with a behemoth win over Carlton, who struggled to get territory and even further struggled to get anything more than a set shot in this match. Whilst the Crows were very plentiful in the attack, this was shown in the scoring shots. It was 16-14, 110 Adelaide to just 7-8-50 Carlton. So Carlton's comeback for the season has sort of experienced another loss. And Adelaide themselves, they got very high shot numbers off turnover. It was 7-10. But there wasn't actually a massive differences in the total number of turnovers and clangers. It's just that Adelaide was so much more clinical at scoring from all areas of the ground. And it just sort of ground Carlton out due to their lack of generation, just leading to the ball going the other way fairly efficiently once Adelaide just managed to get the ball in their hand. Again, Carlton were much do about nothing, and Adelaide just let the game go towards them, or at least that was the vibe from what I saw. Unfortunately, I didn't get to watch all the highlights, so I don't know too much visually from this game, but from the stats, it sort of suggested that. And I think another big problem sort of resurfaces for Carlton. If their tolls are being dealt with, which they did by Adelaide's defense, how do they come up with creative attacks? Because this team is third in getting inside 50 ground ball gets per game, That's Carlton. And yet, I can't confirm this because I can't find exactly how many general play shots they get per game. But just looking in recent history, it's only about 4 or 5 shots per game on ground level, which means that if they don't get a mark or free kick, they're very anemic.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, in that category, the third worst at generating a mark per inside 50. So it's an imbalance that makes them very matchup dependent at the moment. And as we saw, Adelaide, they covered them up. They won. And I actually think it's very fitting for, it coming up again in this game because it's sort of similar to what happened in the drop-off between Adelaide's attack from 2023 to 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Adelaide being the best attacking team in the competition in 2023. And then it just sort of disappeared on them for half a season. And I think the danger side for Carlton is that they don't have a Riley Thilthorpe coming back for them. And this is probably the best lineup that we'll see from them, sans Zach Williams, who's only really a part-timer anyway.
Yeah, because, that's due to how injury-prone he is, which is very unfortunate. But, yeah, you're not wrong in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. It's just very much hard to see where long-term attack's going to be coming from. And, they got away with it from Geelong. As I said, Carlton did look very good from that game, but also, I guess Geelong aren't really like the strongest defensive team. And like once you have to sit back and realize that, you can sort of see where that win sort of came from.
Yeah.
And, as I said, I tipped Adelaide. I tipped Carlton foolishly. I think I even mentioned on last week, I thought that Adelaide had enough tees to shut down Carlton's offense. And then I just got hung up too much on Adelaide's midfield. And, I swayed my tip. But
that sounds about right.
As I said, I really should have backed them in because, as I said, from that, they won very academically. But, I had a very weird tipping. So
oh, yeah, so did I.
It just is what it is sometimes. But, yeah, as I said, Colin should be very happy. And, I mentioned before, Jordan Dawson, last week I put him on the grill. And this time, didn't put him on the grill, but I used to highlight some of Adelaide's midfield inefficiencies. And now you are going to highlight him for Adelaide's efficiencies.
Absolutely. He had a phenomenal game. He was a leading scorer overall. He kicked 3-1 from 22 disposals, 19 of them effective, equating to 86.4% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 7 marks, with 3 of them contested, 3 of them intercept, and 3 of them inside 50. 6 clearances, 9 score involvements, 8 tackles, 21 pressure strikes, and 3 1%ers. It was a very, very strong captain's game, and it was absolutely what that midfield needed to just lift. Because we've seen that they can perform extremely efficiently, but when they have a loss, it's like one or two of those cogs is like just slightly out of place. But as you can see from last week to this week, they know how to bounce back and they know how to pretty much step it up right off the bat, and they did that so well, especially Dawson.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, we keep on saying it. Like, if they can get a mediocre of midfield generation, then their forward line more often than not finishes it off. And this week we saw what a lot of generation can do with a very healthy score. That was actually contributed a lot by the midfield group. It wasn't just the forward line. Thilthorpe kicks a goal. I think coming back, Fogarty, he kicked 2 goals.
He did.
And Tex with just the 1. So it was only, 4 goals from key forwards out of 16. They were still finding plenty of other areas, but as I said, it was still midfield to forward line perfection, really.
Absolutely. It's definitely a blueprint that other teams will have to keep an eye on, because Adelaide have become like really, really good at adapting. Especially so far
and very
this season.
dangerous to lead the mark too.
100%. Especially with Thilthorpe, like he's got strong hands. Jumping over to my next player is Isaac Rankin. He was very prolific throughout that midfield. He kicked 2-2 from 29 touches, 24 effective, equating to 82.8% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 9 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 12 score involvements, 14 pressure acts, 6 scramble gets, and 469 meters gained. And then Max Michelani, I thought was really solid in defense and pushing through half back. He finished with 27 disposals, 21 effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 12 marks, 4 inside 50s, 2 behinds, 8 score involvements, 6 pressure acts, and 520 meters gained. What? I see you eyeing him off. What's going on?
No. I just fixed his name. Not because I'm telling you off, because I need to actually realize how it's spelled too.
Yeah, it's weirdly spelled. It threw me off the first time when I read it.
Yeah.
Jumping over to Carlton, I thought Nick Haynes had a really solid game of defense despite the massive 60-point loss. He collected 16 touches, 15 of them effective, equating to 93.8% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 11 marks, with 4 of them being intercept marks, 8 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 4 spoils. Then Ollie Hollands played admirably through that midfield. He finished with 18 disposals, 14 effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 6 marks, 3 inside 50, 6 tackles, and 14 pressure acts. Thankfully, no injuries and no MRO reports from this match. Very clean from both teams otherwise.
Yeah. And I should actually, I forgot to mention it last time you brought it up, but I did actually hear from the AFL, they are actually not cracking down, but they're launching an internal investigation onto why there's so many contact with the umpires coming up.
Players are probably just not looking where they're
know?
going. Like, I don't think it's intentional.
Like, I'm not saying it's from the umpires, but like, I think they're trying to figure out, like, if they need to put in more effort to stop those things happening, or B, whether there's anything positionally wise the umpires can do. But
or there's a fair chance position wise the umpires could do a lot.
Yeah, maybe. So 4 umpires now. You can imagine that there's a bit more chance to contact them. But
yeah,
good on you, Carlton and Adelaide, for not running into an umpire.
Absolutely. Just before we jump over to our next game, I want to quickly swing back to St Kilda and Freo because the Rising Star was announced, and it was Hugo Garcia who won it, or was nominated for it, to be more specific.
Yeah, you went through the stats for him. Yeah, he was one of your
Yes, he was literally like top of the table. Well, second top of the table. But yeah, 19 touches, 5 clearances. Apparently, he did kick a goal. I did write that down. Kick a goal, 3 score involvement, 10 tackles. Like, it's a really solid performance for a young player. And it's someone who we highlighted like a fair amount last year as well, who we thought could have like a fairly solid early career. And so far, looking really good.
Well, I said it's just like that sort of player for the Saints to add a bit of bolster in their midfield. They're shuffling around players, trying to find who is that next inside midfielder to bring up. And sure enough, I know he plays a bit on the outside too, but Garcia, did fantastically.
Agreed. All right, jumping over to the MCG now for one of the big clashes of the round against Collingwood and Geelong.
I mean, look, as I said, I didn't watch this game. So for me, my Saturday night was going out for dinner with my friend, and unfortunately, the only football I got to watch that day was the tail end of the delayed broadcast of the Eagles game. And honestly, this game would have been far better. It was probably a classic for this year. I would be surprised if this wasn't one of the top 5 games of the year. And the heat was on early. Geelong kicked away, but it was less about the physical contest and more about the ability to create space that defined this very heated contest.
Mm-hmm.
Collingwood dominated the marks inside 50, 18-9, but it was just the quality areas that Geelong were able to get the ball to that got them converting enough from their entries to at least keep them with it scoring-wise, especially from ground level. And despite 7 less shot on goals, they would end up outscoring the Magpies, who got 12-15-87, 13-12-90 for Geelong at the MCG. And unfortunately, it was that inaccuracy from set shots specifically that would haunt Collingwood, because they had such nice movement, but they just all night couldn't finish it off. And I don't know if it's quite the poetry that Chris would want, but it was very poetic for the match, not for his fairy tale ending to his record-breaking consecutive game match that he had the ball on the last set shot and missed it by a fair way.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it would have been a fairy tale ending for Crisp and the Pies. It's 244 consecutive games, something like that. It's a huge
Yeah, something like
it's
that.
a huge number. And as we've spoken in the past, I'm a big fan of Jack Crisp and just the way he goes about it. As a Richmond supporter, good.
Yeah. No, I get ya. It's like, honestly, that's what I said. Like, Collingwood was so annoying when they were being good. So them losing a close game, you know what I mean? Like, they're still playing good football. They still deserve to be like in contention. Also,
Absolutely.
talked about as one of the best teams in the competition.
Well, and whilst they did kind of have
Absolutely.
like that premiership hangover in 24 after winning in 23, like
Yeah.
they're still a really solid side. Like they're very
Yeah.
much fighting for that top 8 contention right now, maybe pushing top 4. We'll see
Yeah.
as the season goes on. But like they've put up some solid outings so far this season, and we know that these close matches, whilst losing the 4 points hurts, they can still learn a lot from these sorts of endeavors.
Yeah. And the thing about this is like, this was a very aggressively played brand of football. Like both teams were sort of allowing opportunity to score off them from turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And the trade-off just to generate offense. And as I said, like the Pies were doing a better job at it. They just didn't convert. And again, like they should have had breathing room in the last, but as I said, it gave Geelong a sniff. Uh, they got a bit of territory numbers back.
Mm-hmm.
They got a few opportunistic goals, and it just got them to get up on top. And as I said, while I don't think like Collingwood, like this point isn't to say like Collingwood should play more restrictive, but they did still suffer the consequences of not making their most of the opportunities if you do play like this.
Yeah.
But it's still made for a very pretty game to watch. And yeah, as I said, we've seen a lot of contests where the best teams have focus more on trying to score well rather than taking away opponents' strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst those two teams actually have had games where they have done that against lesser oppositions, it's actually good to see, like, when you get two teams going head to head, we can see a good upper limit of a 2025 contest where, as I said, instead of trying to dower the contest to get the win, they go aggressively because there was only 13 possessions each per side to generate the scoring shot, and 100 combined inside 50s. I think Collingwood got about 4 more than Geelong. And while there was still a few like statistical wins for each side, it was really just two teams testing their movement metal against each other. And Collingwood won the territory war, but Geelong won the goal kicking score.
Yeah, that's right. Like 15 behinds by Collingwood, not pretty. But granted, Geelong was to kick 12 out of 13, like with 13 goals, 25 scoring shots in total to 27, in fact. So whilst if Collingwood had a better converted, they would have won a little bit more convincingly. But Geelong edging them out, despite the less scoring shots, just being slightly more accurate. And it is a credit to just how well some of their players can aim, essentially.
Yeah, because I mean, like the real one was the general play for Collingwood because it wasn't. I mean, some of their set shots because they were so easy, like were bad, but they were still like 9-8 from set shots. But yeah, that 3-4 on ground level, not making too much of their opportunities compared to 7-4 for Geelong. It made Geelong's attack a lot more mixed. And that's why I think they were able to create the opportunities. Whilst Geelong, as I said, Collingwood were just easier shots from better ball movement. That just didn't quite add enough for the victory.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Jumping over to our individuals, I'm going to start with Sean Manor, who I thought had a really solid outing for Geelong. He kicked 2-2 from 18 disposals, 13 effective, equating to 72.2% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 9 score involvements, 5 tackles, 24 pressure strikes, and 9 grab ball gets. Bailey Smith was huge with ball movement and transition, kicking a goal from 34 touches, 8 contested possessions, 6 marks, 6 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 5 scoring involvements, 18 pressure strikes, 7 grab ball gets, and 715 metres gained. And whilst he did get beaten in the ruck, Mark Blitzarves was very solid around the ground, getting 20 hitouts, 6 to advantage, and a goal from 9 disposals, 4 contested possessions, 3 marks, 4 scoring involvements, 17 pressure strikes, 11 1%ers, and 7 spoils. Jumping over to Collingwood, Brady Marachek was leading scorer for the Pies, kicking 4-3 from 10 touches, 5 contested possessions, 6 marks, 4 of them being contested, 6 being inside 50, and 7 score involvements, which are all of his scores, funnily enough. And then Ned Long had another really solid outing in the midfield, collecting 18 disposals, 13 contested possessions. 13 contested possessions, 72.2% efficiency, 10... No, hang on. I worded that wrong. I do that every week. There's always one that I mess up. 13 effective possessions, equating to 72.2% efficiency. My mistake. 10 contested possessions, 4 clearances, 3 score involvements, 9 tackles, 30 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, and 7 ground ball gets.
Yeah, and honestly, just going back to Blitzars, and it will lead into your next injury coverage, but you sort of forget how useful he is as a ruckman that can just go to ground, contribute, and it very much suits the Geelong midfield style, where they're not always dominating clearances, they're not always getting first hands on the ball, but they have enough shape and structure to A, damage when they do, and B, generally restrict the opponent enough from getting too much going the other way. So
it's not like he's undersized for a ruckman. He's fairly tall, but the fact that he's able to play lower, play like a regular sized midfielder rather than just being a tall lumbering ruckman is a credit to just the way he's always been able to play the game.
Yeah, exactly. And, as I said, it's just so weird because, again, I've said this about Geelong's midfield, but it's the same way about their ruckman, It's you'd never pick them, but they're surprisingly serviceable in the whole context. I know Reece Stanley isn't your number one ruckman you would pick ever, but even he this year has sort of had matches where, he has definitely offered a few solid aspects to Geelong's midfield.
Absolutely. It's just unfortunate that, as you did briefly mention, because it would tie in, he has suffered a hamstring injury. I don't know the extent of it, but I assume it probably knocks him out for a couple of weeks, just due to age, primarily. But hopefully it's not super concerning. Hopefully.
Yeah. But what I will say for Collingwood is that, lost and all that, how good Brody Majacek was in the last half of the game. I think he was sitting at, it was 1-3, and then he kicks 3 goals in the fourth quarter, or maybe one of them was in the third. I'm not too sure. But yeah, as I said, I think that was probably, when Geelong started, Collingwood started to look out of it. He sort of lifted the team up, and as I said, it was very much a game with peaks and valleys. Geelong gets out to a bit, Collingwood flex again, then Geelong get back a bit, then Collingwood come back, and as I said, it was just that classic seesawing contest with enough good play, but also enough jank to make it tension raising. You almost feel like it was more tension because of some of the mistakes from Collingwood's goal kicking, or a few turnovers from Geelong. You know what I mean? It almost added to the not the perfectly played game, but entertainment wise, it would be near peak this game.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Jumping over to the West. Over at Optus Stadium, West Coast Eagles hosted Melbourne, where Melbourne took away the victory by 32 points.
Yes, because you just said it. West Coast Eagles 11-10-76 to Melbourne 16-12 108. And yeah, I mean, we said it week by week, and I won't labor the point. With the lack of clearance game, for the Eagles, it puts them, say, outside of the contest for most games. But I think the West Coast fans will actually be happy to see a more solid effort to try and win in spite of that loss because it was clear as day in this contest. As West Coast had some very nice scoring chains and even a small lead by, I think they still had it at halftime. Maybe they just, coughed it up by then. But they did manage a bit of dominance in the second quarter. But it was a bit too much, especially after McGovern went down with concussion, which led to a few more easier shots that Melbourne are normally accustomed to. As well, Langford got a nice introduction to the midfield in the absence of Clayton Oliver, and along with Gorm, Viney and Trucker, linking up with Chandler and Langdon on the outside, I think Melbourne probably had their best midfield performances of the year. 7-5 coming from stoppage, including 4-1 from centre bounce, smashing the clearances, and almost all the players I mentioned before actually scored a direct goal off their own boots. So, as I said, it was just, score involvements and score from midfield players and, provide a bit much of a gap. I will say for West Coast, a lot has been said about Oscar Allen. And even though the Eagles lost a lot of points, especially when McGovern went down, I'm talking about points conceded.
Yes.
They did seem to have a much more stable defense in there, considering in how many of these quality entries were generated by the lack of their midfield pressure. I think we are sort of seeing some shape come from the Eagles' defense. It's iffy, it's very variable, but again, you can see where they're sort of heading towards.
Yeah.
You can see there's some sort of endpoint where, a couple of those players develop. Again, we've mentioned their distributors, while not perfect, they're sort of working who's going to be the bigger ones. As I said, Chibney in the back line seems to add to that. But yeah, as I said, it's just everything ahead of the ball with the midfield. The forward line, which is mostly good. What I said is just how big is that chasm of West Coast midfielders, and are they going to fix it to enough to where when they do get their first chance to really win, I should say second chance because obviously there was that Essendon game.
Yes.
Will they take that with both fists? And it was very academic from Melbourne. It was very much a boost and, a flex as they try to make up for their still fairly mediocre forward line options who did make, what I was trying to say is when they do get opportunities, to help lift up those forward line options that are on paper mediocre. But as we saw in this game, we're able to take advantage of a lot better looks than they're normally accustomed to.
Absolutely. And that pretty much leads straight into my first individual being Disco Daniel Turner. He had just returned from injury. I believe it was concussion. I can't remember, but I think that was it. But he's back now. He's performing well. And he kicked 3 goals from 19 disposals, 16 of them effective, equating to 84.2% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 7 marks, 5 score involvements, 6 1%ers, 7 ground ball gets, and 4 spoils. Max Gawn, as he usually does, displayed an utter dominance of ruck work out in the West. Granted, he wasn't really up against that much of a prolific ruckman, but we know West Coast is still developing on that front, so give him a little bit of leniency.
I gassed up Flynn last week. It was moments before disaster coming up against Gawn.
Yeah, when you come up against, touted as the best ruckman in the competition, it's hard to measure up.
Yeah.
But Max Gawn was absolutely dominant. He had 47 hitouts with 12 to advantage and kicked 1-1 from 35 touches, 25 effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 22 contested possessions, 8 marks, 5 inside 50s, 9 clearances, 12 score involvements, 2 1%ers, and 8 ground ball gets. I just want to mention 35 disposals as a ruckman. You don't see that anymore, just in general, and yet Max Gawn could just do it just like that.
Well, it's weird because we had that trend when a lot of the ruckmen were playing more in wing and transition contests. I feel like that's actually dropped off a bit more now. They've gone more to fast play on the wing than tall leading targets on the wing. And we've seen ruck possessions go down, but you still can prove sometimes it's the best clearance ruckmen that get the possessions nowadays. And as I said, Cherry and Gorn are very much leading the contest in terms of getting consistently high disposal games.
Yeah, especially because they also seem to find themselves a lot playing off of half back when they're rotating through the center. So that's often where a lot of these high disposal counts do come from, because they come from stopping forward entries.
Yeah. Well, again, Gorn can even go really full back and be last man of defense and get a few deep marks in their opponent's inside 50.
Absolutely. Third on my list is Cade Chandler. He was very prolific with ball movement this week, kicking 1-1 from 26 disposals, 6 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 5 marks, 3 inside 50s, 7 scoring involvements, 8 tackles, 16 pressure acts, 6 scramble gets, and 567 meters gained. Some positive signs for West Coast, as you did briefly mention, Oscar Allen. He did look a little better off defense, in defense this week, I should say. Finishing with 15 touches, 14 of them effective, equating to 93.3% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 12 intercepts, 5 1%ers, 4 spoils, and 389 meters gained. He also had 95% time on ground. And then the fridge, Jack Graham, is still providing a lot of pressure in that midfield, collecting 15 disposals, 9 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 5 inside 50s, 3 clearances, 2 goal assists, 4 score involvements, 10 tackles, and 23 pressure acts. Shout out to debutant Bo Allen as well, not related to Oscar Allen. There's an A and an E that are different in those last names. But he finished with 7 touches, all of them effective, equating to 100% efficiency, 4 marks, 2 tackles, and 8 pressure acts.
Yeah, and even just outside of that, like, it wasn't just you were finding players. Like, there were enough other West Coast Eagles performers that could have been mentioned. Like Ryan Marich had a pretty good game. Ruben Gibney, as I said, a lot of their backline actually performed really well. Elijah Hewitt scoring 3 goals, leading with Disco Turner as the. Jack Waterman kicked 3 goals too.
Yes, he did.
Waterman was just fairly late in the game. And so on and so forth. As I said, it was really just clearances where, as I said, they weren't really getting that much. Again, 5 clearances for Tyler Brockman led the clearances.
He
That's
did.
what I'm saying. It's always weird players that lead West Coast's clearances.
It's just players that you just don't expect. Did you expect like a player, not to mention him to get the West Coast Eagles fans up and about, but Harley Reid, he's the type of player that you would kind of tout to be more of that clearance player, but he's not there yet. Same with Jack Graham, for example. Whilst he's very much a tackling pressure machine, he's also usually very good at getting those clearances as well. But the fact that like Brockman is stepping up shows that they're adjusting fairly well to each other, and they're finally developing like the play style that they kind of wanna play.
Yeah, I don't know. It's still a bit iffy. I think it's just like, I would actually say it's more fragmented. Like, again, honestly, Jack Graham is the most consistent thing, and he's not even spending all the time in the midfield unit.
Correct.
Like Baker, he's done okay. He's done useful things, but he's not a clearance machine.
No, he's not. He never has been.
No, I never has. But you know what I mean? Like, you would hope that pressure allows for someone like a Tim Kelly, a Harley Reid, someone else to step up. But you've got, as I said, you've got a high rotation, and I think Harley is nearly in dropping territory at this point. I think, again, you hate to see it because like all the talk, it's going to make it a bigger event than it actually is. Like a second-year player getting dropped, but.
Yes.
I think it is time because, as I said, he's just really lost form in the contest. And I honestly think that even if it's just a bit of cheap disposal in the waffle, I think that's going to do him more good. He's a confidence player. You got to build him up and you got to protect him a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I want to say about Harley Reid, because you get all that sort of newspaper thing. I'm sure during the week there'll be a bit of talk about it.
I'm sure the West Australian is already all over
it. That's why I was thinking about it, because I saw before we went on side Lloydie suggesting trading him for a couple of first round draft picks. You know what I mean? And it's
despite him being picked up as the number 1 draft pick, I don't know if he's really currently worth that.
Not currently, but you know what I mean. His value would be.
Yeah.
It's just, you know what I mean? It's like, Oh, you could use like one of those first draft picks to like draft a player as good as Harley Reid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I
Like
mean, you could get a bunch
your
of
average
them
player.
if you're able to take a couple. Pull the Richmond.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is like any like second year player is gonna have those stretches. You
Yeah.
know, like
No, you're right.
I don't think I'll be thinking of trading him off unless there's a certainty to go.
Yeah,
In which
agreed.
case, But like, talking about culture of the club, all that sort of stuff, it's like those guys don't have culture, like having an uppity player. Oh, it's true. Like, honestly, when does a player last for West Coast really had to dig their heels in, showing some grit? When you lose this much, you just don't get many opportunities to show grit and toughness. So yeah, as I said, it does make you a bit identityless. Their leaders, young captain Oscar Allen, very up and down. Good to see him having good games again, but still not exactly leading strongly, or at least not enough to get things going.
And their only major veteran player out there at the moment is Liam Duggan, and that's not saying all that much either.
Well, I'm saying it's like some of the biggest leaders for them are probably the players that they brought in, like, well, sorry, I should say like leaders from player standards.
Yeah.
And that would be Jack Graham, who I think by far has been the most consistent of the brought in. And then Liam Baker, who for the most part has the intensity that, warrants him, being respected. Even if it hasn't been, probably as much as he can be potential wise.
Yeah. It's a fair enough assessment. Jumping over to the injury front, Ruben Jinby had a nose break or something. I didn't see the incident, so I don't know how serious it is. It could only just be like a conservative sort of thing, and he might just not play next week. I don't know. That's all I got.
Jeremy he still McGovern, played 91% of the time.
True, so it might have been like a late in the.
No, it was in the McGovern clash.
Oh,
I think he just stuffed his nose in that clash.
Oh yeah, there's a possible chance of that. It might have just been a concern in that case in terms of the report.
Yeah.
As for Jeremy McGovern, he is out with concussion, meaning he won't play against Richmond this week. Archer Reed, the other Reed of the West Coast Eagles, he had a lower leg complaint. I don't know how serious it is. Hopefully, it's not too serious because you don't want young players getting like massive injuries. And then Harrison Petty also goes down with concussion. So thankfully, they have Disco Turner back to be able to cover Petty's kind of contributions to the Melbourne forward line. But it does mean that they're down another tall for a week or two once again.
Mm.
So it's not ideal for Melbourne, but having Disco back is still like an upside.
Yeah, I think it's just like in terms of synchronization for the future, I'd rather a lot more games of them together because they have the future. Not so much Petty, Turner and Van Rooyen.
Yeah.
But at least Petty's like a body that can help in those situations. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame this year they haven't got them all on the park together to whatever they want to utilize that sort of strength.
Yeah,
of tools.
100%. Jumping over to the MRO front, Trent Rivers was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. As we said, there's always at least one a week. Harley Reid was fined $1,000 for striking Caleb Windsor. Doesn't seem to be a super serious strike, so that's perfectly fine. However, Bo Allen, on his debut, takes a one-match suspension for striking Jack Viney. It was careless, but it was also high contact. So, there you go.
I think it was like no surprises there, but yeah. Hard man to beat strike Jack Viney.
He's got a pretty hard noggin.
Yeah, exactly. So you know what I mean? I'm sure he didn't like feel it all that much, but you know what I mean? It's like I feel like a player like Jack Viney, you should get like, even if he's not injured, like if you feel like it's enough to injure another player, you know what I mean? Like you should take that into account. So I don't know. That's just like that would make the MRP a lot more wheel spin than it actually would be. But I mean, if it's going to be a wheel spin, why not introduce some jank rules?
I mean, why not? The AFL is already a mess when it comes to rules. May as well throw in a couple more, see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Jumping over to our Sunday games. We start off with
Mm.
what's meant to be a big one, and for the most part, it pretty much was, is the Battle of the Bridge between Sydney and the Giants.
Yeah, well, this being the other close, relatively good game. Um, and if the Buys and the Cats were about fast ball movement from the outside, finding solid inside 50 space, this game was about ball movement leading to tougher forward contests. And it was Sydney that was able to grind out a win against GWS due to their excellent set shot conversion and marking to make up for their abysmal 2 goals 8 at ground level.
Yep.
So the final score ended up being 12 15 87 to 10 13 73. For GWS, it seems in the first half that Cadman was far and away the most threatening forward option. They really struggled to find consistent targets in the first half. But it did open up in the second half. Stringer came on as a sub to replace someone, I'm not too sure. You'll say in the injuries. It was a guy that Melican hit. And Hogan,
Oh, yeah, that's
he
right.
ended up getting involved late. And you know what? It was like, I think a lot of the sort of I think a lot of the movement was generated from a lot of these teams getting back off intercepts because they were defending so strongly. But again, when you got both teams defending strongly, as I said, it led to a lot of movement that resulted in nothing, or I guess a lot of behinds and tougher shots. That's why this game didn't quite seem as clean as the contest was even, I suppose. Or how free the movement was, I should be saying. But the main difference is the score involvements from the inside mids for the Swans far surpassed the Giants. Finn Callahan being the only real score generator for the Giants, while Rowbottom, Heaney, and Chad Warner all contributed and set up Sydney's game enough for the win in this weirdly high-scoring yet defensive contest. Yeah, I think you could maybe accuse like GWS if you just looked at the stats, and I sort of try to like look at a few more highlights in this game because it did seem more interesting. And I didn't actually feel like GWS over handball, but it really felt like they were searching a lot for their handballs. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
normally, like sometimes when you handball with purpose, it's like to definite forward change, but I feel like the way the orange lads were moving it, I actually thought, they were getting the handball chains, but they weren't finding that threatening option off the boot, a bit forward. And that sort of compounded into the next kick, which was often the kick inside 50. So, while I said like most teams say handball to generate movement to hit dangerous areas, it feel like GWS was sort of just handballing to get out of trouble. And for a team that plays 3 tall forwards, they really don't have a high marking rate inside 50, a bit like Carlton, and really rely on picking up that ground ball to achieve anything. Even though Green has really lifted this season, and I should say that's Toby Green, his absence in the contest today, he didn't really have a good game, was really felt as, Stringer tends to distribute a bit left. He's more of a kicker himself. And yeah, as I said, for GWS trying to threateningly find forward targets, it's really just Darcy Jones again in this game, relying on a few burst plays. And,
Yeah.
this is where you really miss someone like Brent Daniels.
Well, I mean, time and again, it's been proven that Brett Daniels is their best small forward. He's one of their best pressure players. He's he's that good at just finding space and getting his opportunities. And he's not afraid to, hit a hard contest. He's not afraid to make things messy ground level. But he's still able to convert, let's say, 85-90% of the time. And that's what's always kept the Giants like much more threatening, even when their other forwards haven't been firing. Besides, Hogan, considering he was the Coleman medalist last season.
Yeah, I think even Hogan, it's made his job harder because, now he has to take marks rather than, in a mix up, Jesse Hogan will take the occasional mark and all that. Like, it puts a lot more on his shoulders. And I don't think he's like struggled that with this year. Like he didn't have the greatest match, 1 goal free, limited opportunities until late, fairly well marked. But you know what I mean? It's like, as I said, it really feels like if they don't get a play that involves Jesse Hogan, they probably don't have a very conventional attack. And that's something like we've accused Sydney of being like with their forward line.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, like they weren't that much better themselves today. Again, a lot of it was generated from their midfield, but at least they had the defense enough, to at least get that play from rebound attack a bit easier than GWS were. So yeah, as I said, again, Sydney won comfortably enough in the end. But the problem of not stopping transition from the outside is still very apparent. And with Melican out and so many shifts in their forward line and back line, as I mentioned, you could still argue they're using their midfield as a scoring crutch, which might suggest more up and down performances to come. But they are hardly the only team with that problem. So, if they want to make the 8 and contend again, they at least need to consolidate the best parts of this win and, try and, be around the 8 whilst I think they're still, while they still are firmly in tinker mode for 2025. Like,
Yeah.
there has been good moments of Sydney. There's definitely been some bad moments of Sydney, but I think overall, you definitely don't feel like they're a set team at the moment. They're still figuring things out with a new coach.
Yeah, that, and they're still missing a couple of key players, as we mentioned, over the past couple of weeks, still missing Papley and Golden, which definitely is not helping. But, they've managed to flip some things around and get a little bit more of their transition game going, get more of their speed game going. Chad Warner has definitely been a massive help for that. I will mention him as an individual shortly. But showing that they have been able to adapt, like even when they had to like flip the switch and put Nick Blakey up forward last week, like it shows that they have figured out that they can adapt in some aspects. And against the Giants at the very least, despite this clash always being one of the best matches of the year between these two teams, they're still managing to get the edge out. And, whilst they're not necessarily positive in terms of how they scored, being 12-15, they're converting enough to where it's still threatening enough to some teams.
Yeah, and I guess on the flip side, like that's the most disappointing thing for the Giants because, like Sydney, like they've got reasons to be so scattered and so mixed with their performance. But like the Giants, they've only got basically arguably one major injury, depending if Stephen Caniglio comes back next week. So, they've got Brent Daniels out. I've got the list here. Ollie Hannaford and Logan Smith. Like that's their injury list. Not much.
That's really healthy.
That's and crazy. It still doesn't feel connected at the same time. Like, I think a lot of people thought that GWS was going to be very much a deep September threat, but they don't really have that profile at the moment. And, it's a bit of a concern for Kingsley, And again, in such a heavily offense-based league, how can GWS, who are this grinding team, how will they compete against, higher scoring profile teams? And is it just something that they can't do, that they do have to go back on the drawing board, figure out how to open up play to involve their, again, on paper, very prolific forward line?
That's such an important question. And I want to kind of just throw a brief idea out at you. We've seen, obviously, Toby Bedford, who was the player that went out with the injury, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
I will mention that properly in full in a moment. We've seen Toby Bedford become a tagger, who's become a very prolific tagger, mind you. He's done a really good job and some pretty quality talent so far. But are they maybe missing a player like James Peatling, who's now thriving out at the Crows?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because obviously it's hard to say that because, obviously, I guess the idea was like Finn Callahan was going to be the man for them. But, you sort of realize now that honestly, maybe they needed more. Like, it's not just working out, for that one player. It's just their midfield isn't that threatening. And, like Tom Green, he's going to be a mainstay. And, while he can have some cheap possessions, you still need a sort of player like him to dish the ball out. Has a few turnovers, but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
in a solid midfield, you care less about that. But then it's a drop off because you know what I mean. Like they're inside players. Kelly getting older. As I said, they're relying on Cornelio to come back.
Who is also an older player. Kellen Ward, an older
Exactly.
player. And whilst they're still Kellen Ward's
Yeah.
still having a great season, like it's gonna
Yeah,
catch
well,
up to
Callum
him.
Ward's more outside.
Yeah, that's true.
But you know what I mean? It's like trying to win those clearances. Like it's a very thin uh amount of people that they've got rotating their centre bounces. And as I said, it's not so much the player loss. I think it's the variety loss to an area of the ground where they weren't exactly smashing teams. Like their outside was a lot better than their inside. Like probably again one of the best outside teams in terms of both defending transition and generating. At least movement. But yeah, as I said, we saw like the Giants. If they generated more inside 50s than last year, they're going to be looking good. But they just don't have an inside midfield that can get that enough. And,
yeah, that's right.
I think, that does come back to, where if they kept, if they didn't lose all of their, it wasn't just Peatling, but Peatling's going to be the, one that you really look to, like even if they kept coming and like put him in the midfield more. And I know you don't always get to keep these sort of players, but yeah, they just needed one or two of them to stay. But now they're looking a bit thin, really.
Yeah, and yeah, as we said, like they've got still got a really solid defense, and we know they've got a very solid forward line. But with the loss of Peatling coming and just a little bit of depth in that midfield, especially as you have these aging players, there's only so much you can really do in terms of ball transition and pressure.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's enough about the Giants for the moment. Let's jump over back to Sydney, where I touch on my individuals, starting with the Brett Kirk medalist, Chad Warner, as I mentioned. He was immense through the midfield. He finished with 24 disposals, 19 effective, equating to 79.2% efficiency, 15 contested possessions, 10 inside 50s, 7 clearances, 2 goal assists, 9 score involvements, 4 tackles, 26 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, 10 ground ball gets, and 579 metres gained. James Jordan was the only multiple scorer for the Swans. He kicked 2 goals from 18 touches, 16 effective, equating to 88.9% efficiency, 3 contested possessions, 6 marks with 2 of them inside 50, 2 inside 50s overall, 3 score involvements, 3 tackles, 15 pressure acts. And Dane Rampy, the veteran, would put in some pretty solid pressure on ball. He collected 12 disposals, 4 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 3 score involvements, 8 tackles, 12 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, and 2 spoils. I forgot that he was 34, by the way.
He still looks permanently like permanently like 30 sort of deal.
Yeah, but I didn't know he was that old. I thought he was a little bit younger, but yeah, he's putting in some decent efforts still. It's good to see. Shout out also to Joel Hamling for kicking his first career goal in AFL. So good for him. Congratulations. Over to the Giants. Finn Callahan, as you kind of touched on throughout this breakdown, was very solid with ball transition, finishing with 33 disposals, 25 effective, equating to 75.8% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 7 inside 50, 6 clearances, 8 score involvements, 8 tackles, 16 pressure acts, 536 metres gained. And then Jake Stringer, once he was subbed on, of course, he kicked truly, kicking 3 goals from 5 touches, 4 score involvements, 9 pressure acts. And shout out to Giants debutant, I think it's Hosea Delana.
Yeah.
It seems like a very South American kind of pronunciation. Who played a pressure role, collecting 3 disposals, 5 tackles, and 16 pressure acts.
I want to say, I got a feeling he's got roots in the Tiwi Islands. I just saw his, like calling him mum and dad sort of thing.
Oh yeah,
and I do remember there was some island-based link. Apologies if it's not Tiwi Islands, but yeah. So I think that's where that sort of comes from.
I think it's a cool name, and it seems like Kingers wants to kind of put him on as a pressure sort of role, because he was, he didn't start as a sub, so he did play out most of the game. Low disposal count, which is fine, but 5 tackles, 16 pressure acts, it's still fairly solid outing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, yeah, as we mentioned for injuries, Toby Bedford was the high hit, suffered an eye injury, said he had blurred vision uh, on the report, which hopefully in his case, will just heal up naturally throughout the week and he'll be able to play next week. Otherwise, he might have to take a week or two off just to ensure that there's no permanent damage or anything like that. But fingers crossed, all is well.
Yeah.
All right, jumping over to a match that I pretty much expected this to go this way. That is the centenary match for Hawthorn. Yes, I think it was their centenary. I can't remember. But it's the
Yeah.
centenary match for Hawthorn at the MCG, where they had all of their veterans out. They had like 50 plus invitees, I believe, over the generations of their 13 or so premierships, including Alistair Clarkson. He made an appearance. Good for him.
Yeah.
Against Richmond.
Yeah. And I will like to call you out. I don't always like to call you out. This one I'm fairly happy. You were confident that Richmond were going to make a
I
contest
made
out of
an
this.
argument that we had a
Last
chance.
week.
I made an argument
Yeah.
that we had a chance. I didn't say that we were going to win, because I was never going to tip it. I expected Hawthorn to win. I just wasn't expecting a 10-goal loss.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But anyway, I didn't want to labor the point too much because, yeah, it was a bit of a dismal day. Probably made a bit worse for Richmond just due to bad set shot kicking.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, it wasn't like a terrible match. It's just, Hawthorn were just allowed too much free movement from the back half. And territory-wise, that meant that Hawthorn just didn't need to dominate the inside 50 count like you might expect in this sort of blowout. But it was just the quality of their goals. 9 goals from deep sub 30 meters out. 20 marks inside 50, which is very impressive for a one-chol forward line. Do you get what I did there?
Yes,
One
yes,
chol,
I
one
do
tall.
get what you
Yeah.
did there. Very good.
Just laboring the point for the viewers. So the other big downside for Richmond was actually going goalless in that first quarter because they, at least from stats wise, they did actually have a bit of possession dominance, but that could only equate to 0 goals 3 from 16 inside 50 entries. But yeah, the Hawks kept on winning the contested possession whilst Richmond turned it over enough for Hawthorn just to get very easy counter play from them, getting a nice efficient 10-goal free from turnover. And again, it's pretty much the Hawthorns way. They won't always ruthlessly shred you if they feel like they can just control you from turnover.
Yes.
Like they'll let the game happen and beat you fairly solidly from it.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very good at being quick on their feet and able to take advantage of like the briefest of turnover moments.
Yeah, because it's funny because they're going into like speed of ball movement profiles and all that, and like Hawthorn are actually one of the slower teams. Because when they get their own possessions, they're fairly methodical.
Mm-hmm.
And the fast play that you think about Hawthorn is when that turnover happens, it's go. So again, the best thing from their Hawthorn, I thought today was their depth of contributors. While it was a tiny bit messy, apparently for both teams at times, or at least from what I heard, the Hawks had so many people on the line that chipping in, making it hard to find a weak link in their game. Like I said, it wasn't a perfect game from them, but it was very much complete. Meanwhile, sort of the opposite. It was very hard to see much imposing threat from the Tigers. Because after the misfire in their first quarter, it just seems that they've sort of booked themselves into not being a threat. There wasn't too many damaging players on the field for the Tigers. And as such, Hawthorn really didn't treat them like one. As I said, they just let the game come to them and in the end won fairly convincingly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like Hawthorn just considering, this match had a lot of riding on it in terms of sentimental value for the Hawks. They just proved time and again, by far and away, I should say, would be more apt term, that they are a contender again this season. Despite the fact that no one at this point last season, no one really had anything riding on them. Everyone expected them to be, bottom 6, bottom 8. And then obviously they had that miracle run, which pushed them straight to finals. But now that we've seen a lot more of what they can do, even without, Lewis and Day, and well, especially without Lewis and Day, because they've been out for so long and Day's been very on and off. Like they still have so many impressive avenues up forward and through that, especially through that midfield. Obviously, you've got players like Sicily who can just rotate all over the ground. Um, Sam Frost, despite not being, I guess, like one of those more big kind of not I players you kind of watch. I thought has had fairly solid outings with being in at times. Um, like the recruits of Battle and Barras, of course, have really stepped up and definitely helped lifted that defense, even when they've had some low moments at times. But overall, Hawks are extremely threatening. And granted,
Yeah.
Richmond bottom 4 team that you expect this kind of outcome, but they're able to do this against a lot of the better teams as well.
Yeah, and it's like, that's the thing where I've mentioned before, like, with all the trading in Hawks defense, like, I don't want to be sold the fact that they're like an indestructible force, yada, yada, yada. They did get a bit overhyped, but they definitely know how to win. And you know what I said? Like, I thought they might take a few more step backs this year. I guess arguably the loss against Port was sort of that step back, but yeah, for the most part, they've just done the job well enough. They've got a lot of their younger players involved. They've dealt with any injury that come away, as you mentioned, and as I said, they're just a solid team that should be contributing deep in December. September.
Oh well, if the season went on for that long, maybe. But yes, September.
Maybe.
Jumping over to the individuals, and speaking of sentimental value, this veteran, had a massive sentimental moment during this game. Not that he really reacted to said sentiment, he just wanted to play and enjoy the game. But Jack Gunston was the highest scorer for the game and for Hawthorn, kicking 3-2, including his 500th career goal. He was 2 off when they started the game. He kicked that from 15 disposals, 7 contested possessions, 6 marks with 4 of them inside 50, 3 inside 50s, 10 score involvements, 5 ground ball gets. Youngster Henry Hustwaite, let me pronounce that correctly, put on immense pressure through that midfield, finishing with 19 touches, 16 effective, equating to 84.2% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 5 marks, 5 clearances, a behind, 10 score involvements, 8 tackles, and 22 pressure acts. And recruit Josh Battle, as I briefly mentioned before, was very important and played a transition role this week. He collected 33 disposals, 31 effective, equating to 93.9% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 12 marks, 7 score involvements, and 506 meters gained. As for Richmond, I think there was only one player that kind of stood up the most, and that was Jacob Hopper in his 150th. He collected 28 touches, 22 effective, equating to 78.6% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 4 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 5 score involvements, 4 tackles, 13 pressure acts, and 6 ground ball gets. And also a brief shout out to James Trezise for kicking his first career goal also.
I don't have too much to say about the rest of this game, so I do have a fun question for you. How many goals does Jack Gunston have to get 500 career goals for Hawthorn?
I don't know. I didn't even realize I forgot that he didn't start at Hawthorn.
Played for Adelaide 2 years.
2 years?
Total of 14 games. Help you out there.
Okay. Let's say I'm gonna say on an average he kicked maybe 12 goals for Adelaide. Am I close?
I mean, you're in the region, but it is very impressive how quickly he started off. He actually kicked 20 goals for Adelaide, which means he obviously needs 20 more.
Well, actually, he's now on 501 goals, so he needs only 19 more.
Oh, sorry, 19. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But no, I forgot that he didn't start at
quiz.
Hawthorn. I forgot that Hawthorn was his second team.
Yeah, against
he's
Steak
been there
Knife,
that long. It's just
again, yeah. In the context for Adelaide, they did actually have a fairly potent forward line at the time. So
true.
Yeah, as I said, I think it was just the Steak Knife deal that
but
ended up being
is also
a
going
lot
back
better value.
15 years.
Almost. 2011. Yeah,
yeah. There
exactly.
you go.
So, 2 numbers for Adelaide: 28-6, and then the rest of his career playing the number 19.
Fair enough. On the injury front, just something minor with Noah Bolter. He rolled his ankle. I believe it was late in the 3rd quarter. I think we made the sub then. I can't remember who was subbed, or even if he was subbed, unless it was just in the fourth. But that should be minor, and he should be good to play against West Coast this week.
Yeah. So Morris Rioli Jr. was the sub player for Richmond.
That's right. All right. Jumping over to the last game, the game that we all hyped up, thought it was going to be an absolute
Yeah.
banger of a match, and it kind of just wasn't. It was the Brisbane Lions
Yeah.
or the Brisbane Bears for a special centenary kind of moment.
Mm.
Um, Against the Gold Coast Suns for the Q Clash.
Yeah, and you would think like a 17-point win to Brisbane, like the way that these two teams score, you would have thought, oh, that's a fairly close game, but it really wasn't. And it was an exercise in just how much control Brisbane could flex on their solid opposition.
Even in the weather, because it rained, so it made it a very
Yeah.
wet and rough kind of game.
Yeah, but these two teams know how to score, like in those greasy sort of
They do.
conditions. So yeah, as I said, the 9 scoring shots in the third quarter that Brisbane were able to generate that sort of separated these two teams were the only scoring shots that the Suns were able to generate for the whole game. So this was really just Brisbane controlling ground, controlling ball movement. You know, the Suns were restricted to 40 entries to 56. And it was really just a matter of the Suns, because they had to start deeper where they normally start a bit more higher. They found movement a bit more difficult at this time. Wasn't getting enough supply up the ground. They got absolutely smashed in stoppages and clearances. They tried to do a few things. They moved Rowell out the centre, flirted with Humphreys, Flanders, and Graham getting more centre bounce attendances, but nothing seemed to work as all three of Neil, Ashcroft, and McCluggage just sunk up to be an unstoppable force like we have seen out of Brisbane's midfield.
That's right.
But on the flip side, to why this wasn't an absolute blowout, given the dominance of midfield, the Suns' defense should really be given high honours this week. They forced Brisbane into harder shots. They stood tall. They didn't let the tolls dominate. They didn't concede that many marks inside 50, considering how many entries Brisbane had. It was just Brisbane was so much more damaging in every other area of the ground that they just eked out a lot more score. And again, that's why it was a very, again, like the Sydney and GWS games, a lot of behinds for Brisbane. It was that sort of, it was enough opportunities to start to convert. I think also another point is the Gold Coast. You've seen him a lot in this game. Sorry, not this game. This season. Love to set up from intercept. And I guess the question mark still remains, like, how much does this translate against solid opposition who do very well in restricting their own turnovers? Because the Lions do that. I think they gave away the least amount of intercepts per game last year. And, as I said, it led to a lot of Gold Coast's main ball winners. All of their intercepts were fairly deep, so off the halfback, and B, of them, not many of those players, so we're talking about your Riolis, your Bodie Ullans, Mac Andrews, they weren't having many score involvements. So yeah, as I said, not really much to say about this game. As I said, there was a few things that were highlighted, a lot of nothing. But as I said, a few good things for Gold Coast, a heap from Brisbane, but yeah, not much to remember in this highly hyped pineapple grapple.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because both of these teams, prior to both of their losses 2 weeks ago, were really, really hyped going into this. And then obviously they both had their bounce back wins last week. So coming into this clash, it was meant to be like one of these big thrilling games to hype up AFL in Queensland. But it was kind of just a nothing game, which is extremely surprising.
Yeah, and especially because I said I came back fairly late, and I actually only watched a tiny bit of the last quarter. Sort of lost interest, and then came back for the last couple of minutes, which was literally just Brisbane slowly kicking the ball around their back line. Like, this was, yeah, as I said, it was almost as if like every force available made this contest as not exciting as it could be for two teams that, still got aspects of their game going.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just because it was, like, putrid by both of these teams. It was just a bit of a struggle that you would expect to see in, like, a Queensland-based football. But, as I said, like, two teams that can get a lot of offense going that just couldn't find a way.
Yeah, that's right. And it's unlucky because it would have been really cool to see like an absolute like high intensity sort of game. But
Hmm.
no, it's just a regular game.
Yeah. And
um
again,
so is that all you want to touch on?
yeah. No, you
All
can.
good.
You can.
Sweet. So let's jump over to our individuals, starting off with the Marcus Ashcroft medal winner, which you guessed it, it was won by an Ashcroft. It was Will Ashcroft,
Mm.
who was absolutely electric, finishing with 34 disposals, 25 effective, equating to 73.5% efficiency, 17 contested possessions, 6 marks, 4 inside 50s, 9 clearances, 5 score involvements, 15 pressure acts, 10 ground ball gets, 480 meters gained. Charlie Cameron decided to show up this week after having a very slow start to the season. He kicked 3-2 from 13 touches, 7 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 5 marks, 3 contested 3 of those marks were contested, 3 of them were also inside 50, and 6 score involvements. And then Harris Andrews was impressive in defense, as per usual, collecting 18 disposals, 17 effective, equating to 94.4% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 11 intercepts, 12 marks, with 5 of them being intercept marks, 12 1%ers, 11 spoils, and 94% time on ground. Jumping over to Gold Coast, and Joel Jeffrey was very solid with transition and movement, finishing with 29 touches, 17 of them effective, equating to 85% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 7 intercepts, 11 marks, 3 inside 50s, 5 tackles, 3 1%ers, and 629 meters gained. And then Took Miller performed well. He kicked a goal from 29 disposals, 22 effective, equating to 75.9% efficiency, 15 contested possessions, 5 clearances, 7 score involvements, 5 tackles, 22 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. On the injury front,
Yeah.
sorry, actually, no, you go first. You good.
I was about to say, not even the greasy conditions could keep Tuk from going on his goal kicking frenzy, continuing his personal best.
Of averaging a
yeah,
goal a game. It's
great to see. Yeah,
very
yeah. A
solid.
bit more, I think. Yeah.
Very, very solid. On the injury front, Sam Day suffered a hamstring concern. Same with Lockie Weller. So not looking good on that front, but hopefully.
Hard to see it in a Sam Day clash too. Sam Day Cup.
Oh yeah, it's true. But hopefully all is well, and they're okay either for next week's clashes or if they need to take a week off or two. Hopefully it's all right. The MRO reports haven't actually come through yet for Sunday's game, so we can just jump straight over to the ladder because it's been a little bit since we updated on the ladder, so we'll run through that. So as we can see here, or as I will just casually talk about, Brisbane are now game clear on top at 28 points. Collingwood on second place at 24 points. Hawthorn equaling them in third place on 24. To round out fourth to seventh on 20 points is the Suns, the Crows, the Bulldogs, and the Cats. With GWS rounding out the top 8 on 16. They are tied with Fremantle at 9th, St Kilda at 10th, Essendon at 11th, and Port Adelaide at 12th. Carlton, Sydney, and Melbourne are each on 12 points, rounding out 13th, 14th, and 15th. And then rounding out the bottom 3 is Richmond on 8 points, sitting 16th, North Melbourne with 4 on 17th, and West Coast still winless on 0 points.
Yeah, and a very interesting ladder in the respect of like last year, we were seeing a lot of teams with like percentages of like 120, 110 sitting at 11th and 12th, whereas this year only one team has over 100 percentage that sit in the bottom 9 of the ladder, and that is Carlton at 13th with a percentage of 108.
I still remember last season where Essendon were like sitting pretty in the top 8 with a percentage below 100, which is crazy that they were just kept winning these close games.
And again, the funny thing is this year, we still technically have that anomaly of Brisbane being first, despite having the lowest percentage of the top 8. 114.4. Next lowest is GWS with 115. But, it all seems fairly, a lot of the top 8 just seem fairly solid, It's going to be, I don't want to say it's like set, but I can definitely see arguments to why you might believe, again, good chance that the Suns make it to the finals. Western Bulldogs with their back half probably not going to drop. Adelaide's maybe your biggest iffy one, but percentage of 131.8. Hard to argue at this point. And a lot of the clubs below, it's going to be a very hard time for a Fremantle, Port Adelaide, Carlton, Sydney, Melbourne, Essendon to get in.
Yeah, at the
I didn't
moment.
really want to hear those because, I don't think Essendon's actually going to make it in. St Kilda, probably a bit iffy, but they're finding ways to win. Yeah, it's really like Fremantle, Port Adelaide, Carlton, and Sydney, like with that extra pressure to make finals that are just, you're really only seeing like maybe 1, 2 of those eking in. And yeah, it's a very tough position for me, even though it is so early in the year.
Well, speaking of Fremantle, shall we just jump straight over to the matches coming up this week because they're
Let's get
starting
on in it.
first. Going over to Optus
Mhm.
Stadium, it's Fremantle and Collingwood. After the performance against the Saints and how, despite losing, how Collingwood still performed against the Cats, what do we reckon this is going to equate to?
Oh, form wise, I mean, obviously there was that draw last year. Otherwise, Collingwood have had a fairly decent record against Fremantle, although a lot of those are being played at the MCG.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess it's an interesting one. Fremantle have tended to play a bit better at Optus. Obviously, solid win against the Bulldogs. Narrow win against Sydney. I know they haven't been the best team this year, but they were playing well that game.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I said apart from that loss, I think that was their only loss at home. Source needed, but so it's not out of the question. However, as I said, it's going to take a solid defensive effort because again, the Magpies are just finding ways from movement to get targets into their forward line. Last year they were very patchy in their ways of doing that, whereas this year they've gotten a lot more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't have a situation where both the inside midfield and their actual defense are playing poorly.
Yeah.
So otherwise, they've got a few options in the forward line. They need to get more at ground level. But yeah, I mean, gut feeling just says Collingwood gets this done. Small blip last week against Geelong, but like they really had the avenue set up to win that game. And as I said, Fremantle just didn't have any avenue of winning for the next year if you're literally basing off last game's performance. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Right.
just too hard not to go Pies.
Yeah, I think Collingwood are just clear favourites, and just based on form alone, they should come away from this game with a fairly solid margin. However, like Freo could surprise
But nah.
us. They might not be frauds this
Yeah.
week. Who knows?
Remember, Geelong defensively are a bit loose too. So as good as
That's true.
Magpies' movement are, I think it will be reined back a bit. But it might be reined back in the fact that like they were also missing. So I think like on average they actually scored what would be expected.
True.
It's just as I said, yeah, swings and roundabouts really.
Yeah, it really is. All right, jumping over to the MCG for Spud's game. The Danny Frawley mental health match that St Kilda have now began putting on every year up against Carlton.
Yeah, and honestly, again, last year this is where St Kilda managed one of their shock wins against decent-ish opposition, although this was the very late last year one against a very banged up Carlton forward line.
Was
So again, it's going to be interesting. Carlton defensively, they shouldn't be too concerned with St Kilda's forward line. They did get touched up by Adelaide. But it's really how much St Kilda can follow up there inside midfield. Solidness from last week, because we've seen them be fairly vanilla before, and we've seen Carlton are able to outmuscle some inside midfields. Obviously, the reverse happened last week, but if they were playing to form, you would see like Carlton getting an avenue to win. But yeah, they're going to need something at ground level. Like they're going to need to be a bit more creative. St Kilda aren't going to allow them set shots, so I just reckon this might just be an ugly contest. I
I
don't know
think
if I can
I
get a
think
winner, but I don't think it will be above. I'll
yeah.
be struggling to see both teams get above 70 points, to be
Yeah,
honest.
you're right. And I think the fact that this is being played at the MCG rather than at Marvel can be a big factor to that. And that kind of
Mm.
leads me to want to lean more towards Carlton. One, because they have the better experience at the MCG, for one.
Mm.
Um, but St Kilda have been very creative so far this season, and I think that they could definitely
Yeah.
surprise Carlton, and maybe they've figured out a method of being able to play at the MCG, considering it is a much wider ground than what Marvel offers.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if St Kilda win, like, they'll show a lot of growth and all that, whereas Carlton, you know what I mean? I still feel like they're going to be a bit iffy, so I think St Kilda have more to play for. But you know what I mean? It's just, it's hard to fully commit into faith into either of these two teams, but on paper, as I said, it's hard to look past Carlton's midfield just not dominating, but I said that last week against Fremantle, and I got a lot of egg on my face.
You indeed did. Yeah, honestly, currently I'm leaning Carlton, but who knows what could happen with this one. But might jump over to a slightly more, I want to say slightly more interesting match, but I don't think it's actually going to be. It's Melbourne and Hawthorn at the MCG as well.
I think the most interesting thing, like, how will Melbourne set up their inside midfield against a team that, I'm not saying like they're an inside midfield dominance, because like I think Hawks actually generate a lot more from the outside. Um, but you know what I mean? They're still like solid in their shape around it. Um, and I guess the other thing too is like Melbourne's had the last week victory against the Hawk and all in fairly convincing fashion.
Yeah,
So, I don't think it means that much. Hawthorn are a very different team than they were a couple of years back, but you know what I mean? It's about if Melbourne get a sniff or not, because again, defensively they can shut down a few of the Hawks' movement. It's about their inside midfield and outside being as good defensively as our offensively, because again, if you can limit the amount of set shots, oh sorry, not set shots, just shots in general,
mm-hmm.
that Hawthorn get outside of their forward six, you can actually be fairly well off against them. Melbourne have the capability to do that. Whether I think they will, I'm a bit doubtful, but I think this is probably again a game that's a bit closer than other people expect.
Yeah,
I'm just not sure if Melbourne will actually be in it. You know what I mean? I think they'll just be with Hawthorn more than posing a threat to them.
yeah, absolutely. I think Melbourne might have the capabilities to play with and to run with Hawthorn, but I think Hawthorn might just be able to generate a much better scoring output and much better effectiveness in front of goal to just have a probably a clear victory in this case.
And again, Melbourne still generate a fair few turnovers, and as we've seen for the Hawthorn, they're very willing to let the game come to them, and Melbourne just feel like a side that, as much as they can generate, they also muck around a fair bit, so that'll
One
go into Hawthorn's
one
advantage.
matchup that I'm definitely interested in taking a look at is Lloyd Meek versus Max Gorn. I think that's going to be a
Yeah,
very interesting matchup.
I think it's like what Lloyd Meek can do around the ground, because we're seeing games where he hasn't quite dominated the hitouts, but still bobbed up, kicked a few goals. So,
Mm.
it's one of those things where you might actually see Lloyd Meek versus Max Gawn deep in Hawthorn's attack. Can Lloyd Meek actually find some offensive craft to go up against probably one of the most defensively set ruckmen in the comp?
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible, and the fact that we just saw Max Gorn have an extremely dominant game around the ground as well as in the ruck against Lloyd Meek, who also had a very similar game against Richmond, despite matching up fairly evenly against Nankervis. This could be like just a huge midfield battle overall.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, Hawthorn a lot more threatening on the outside, but Melbourne having the keys inside to actually, at least there's avenues for movements for both teams.
Mm. Absolutely. So just tip wise, I am going Hawthorn. That should be quite obvious in that case.
Oh, yeah.
But who knows? Hopefully Melbourne can give us a bit of a surprise. Jumping over to Marvel Stadium, however, it's Essendon and Sydney, and this one, I kind of want to give the edge to Sydney on this one, but that is purely
Hmm.
based on Essendon's injury front more than anything.
Yeah, and it's almost ironic. You think if Sydney were at home, you might actually think there might be less of a chance. Um, because again, they haven't done too well.
Yeah, they've got a
But
poor record at the moment.
Essendon, they just got that bit of, not a bit more guts than they've, had in recent years. And Sydney is a matchup where they have actually produced some pretty good contests over the year past. Last year probably wasn't the best example. They had that shootout with them, but then the other game was a bit of a blowout. But I think Essendon have become a bit more solid, especially defensively since that time. And Sydney obviously have shifted from a more zone systematical defense to a more one-on-one base, which I don't think Essendon minds all too much, considering, you know what I mean? Like, they've got people on ground level that can pick up the ball. They're not relying on Langford as much this season to be a contested marking beast as much as providing opportunities. So,
Yeah,
you know, it's not impossible for Essendon to win, but I mean, it's pretty hard to really back them in seriously. It's just
yeah.
one of those things where you're like, I don't know, I'll sort of hope for an Essendon upset.
And Essendon upset would be extremely interesting, but I don't know if it's gonna happen. Most primarily due to their injuries, like they're
Yeah.
slowly running out of personnel to really contend.
And also, the flip side of that is if Essendon do get an upset victory and they manage to find themselves near or in the eight at some point in the season, do their fans start getting hope again, only to be mercilessly crushed at the end of the season?
Well, the
Like they
reality of it
normally
is
do.
that there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to have a surviving ruckman to get there, because currently they can only rely on Goldstein, and we don't really have a
Yeah.
hard set date as to whether the other two can even come back.
Yeah, I mean, that is a factor. But honestly, let's mention this one. Like, Grundy's had a pretty bang on
Oh yeah,
ordinary year.
yeah, he has a very very ordinary year. So like just the
And
matchup
like,
between Grundy and Goldstein, like
yeah.
it isn't really all that much in it, but
And if he's going to be not running around, like Goldstein can't run around the ground, but like Grundy has an impact around the ground, and like Goldstein taps were okay. It was only around the ground where English was getting um dominant, and even though it was actually less dominant than I thought it was going to be,
hmm,
it was still a good game, but I thought Goldie was actually okay. He was just getting gassed at the end. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Again, not seriously going for Essendon, but I sort of want it to happen.
we could see it. All right, jumping over to a potential match of the round, being the Gold Coast Suns and the Bulldogs playing up in Darwin.
Second home.
Yeah, well, yeah, I pretty much just give it. I want to give it straight up to the Suns on this one because they have a really good record up in Darwin. Um,
Mm.
but as we kind of just talked about, like the Dogs, pretty solid form. They have a really solid setup at the moment, and I think it could contend really well with just how the Suns structure up.
Yeah, well, we saw like Mars Stadium. I know it's a lot different to playing in Darwin, but like Bulldogs
Well, yeah,
adjusting to
it's a
really harsh
cold and
conditions.
windy compared to the warm temperatures of northern Queensland
Yeah, I
or
know,
the
but you
Northern
know what I
Territory.
mean. I meant more in terms of like this game being a bit more played at ground level, sort of a bit more about individual contests, and smartly working the ball. That's where I think the Bulldogs had a bit of advantage. I think weirdly enough, like we have seen a lot of games where the Bulldogs just muff this sort of game up, in their history. Just due to inaccuracies or whatever. But I actually think there's enough growth to where I'm actually backing in the Bulldogs. I think they're going to continue on their good form, and I don't think while they won't smash the Suns, I'm not sure that they will exactly get their game going, because they've got so much forward half pressure, and I think they'll win enough clearances to where, like last week, the Suns might be forced just to defend a bit back. And
Yeah,
while I think the Bulldogs won't score as freely as they might want, I reckon they'll just force a few more turnovers in these greasy conditions, ball use is a bit harder, and I think they'll win it.
Yeah, I mean it's very much a possibility, and I think it's a little bit more favorable to the Bulldogs at the moment to like force the Suns to play more defensively rather than get their offensive game going. So I mean I'm currently a coin flip. I want to kind of back the Suns in just because of their record. But it could genuinely go either way this one.
Yeah.
Jumping over to another potential game of the match, right, well, pretty much one right after the other, is the showdown.
Mm. And this is going to be very interesting because, not only is this sort of a team where Adelaide definitely want to continue to prove themselves, they want to actually, because we've had a lot of times where Port's been dominant and then lost games to Adelaide. So if they win a game where they're dominating and Port's struggling, it's going to feel even sweeter for them. Whereas for Port, systematically wise, the midfield battle is going to be very important, both in terms of how they win the ball, let alone just winning it in general. Because I think both teams can probably set up fairly well from the back half entries from each team. Port not being the best at moving the ball from the back half, especially if their back half played like last week. I think I didn't say it specifically, but I think Kane Farrell played one of his worst ball use games that I've seen him play, and a few others joined him. So, and again, Adelaide, while they are very prolific off the back half, I think Port actually defend that fairly well compared to most teams. It's really just scoring off their own turnovers. So I think, again, if Port Adelaide can get enough offense and not turn the ball over, like if they can make their turnovers a bit deeper in attack, I actually think Port have a fair chance of winning this. But if they muck around with the ball, it's hard to see Adelaide not getting on top and just finding a lot of scoring avenues. Like, I think defensively one-on-one Port Adelaide match up well, but they definitely could get exposed running the other way. And again, I'm going to tip Port Adelaide. I do every week unless they're rabble, and I don't think they're rabble at the moment. But yeah, I would still think logically you'd pick Adelaide.
Yeah, I'm definitely going towards the Crows. One, just based on form, and two, just I'd rather pick the Crows. I am not a Port supporter right now.
Yeah. It's very frustrating. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, you're telling me. At least I can accept that I'm in a rebuilding phase right now. Speaking of said rebuilding phase, the first match of the Sunday games is Richmond playing against the West Coast Eagles. I will be at this game, but I'll only be there until halftime because I have an obligation at 4 o'clock. So I'll only get to see the first half in person, and I'll have to watch the rest on my phone. I'm hoping we win.
What obligation can be bigger than a spoonball?
I'm doing a paid tournament sort of thing, so I'm making money on the side.
I guess money's nice.
Money is very nice. But yeah, I am looking forward to this clash. It'd be good to. It's always good to go to the footy. But I'm just praying for a win. If we lose to West Coast, it's not a great sign.
Wow, I guess the other side is with West Coast finally getting a relief in not having a good offense to defend, how much can they actually generate off their seemingly improved halfbackers? Because I think that's going to be the biggest thing is like Richmond, they're not a transitionally defending team. Like they don't do badly in the stoppages. They should set up a lot of their game, but if they don't score enough, they will get burnt going the other way by the Eagles. I don't think this is just as simple as Richmond showing up, just exposing the Eagles' trap defense. That being said, with how bad the Eagles are in the middle, like, they're gonna have a lot of opportunities for Richmond to score. So it's gonna come down to how well Richmond convert from those. If I was tipping in a gauntlet, this might be like one of the first times I tip the Eagles in like, roll the dice for this sort of match. The tipping where you can only tip one team every week.
Yeah.
That thing. That might be where I take a risk with this one. But otherwise, I'll still just back in the Tigers. I think this is a real 50-50.
Is this going to be a clash of the number one draft picks? Are we going to get a Lawler and Reid matchup?
I reckon Reed gets dropped. I really can't see justifying keeping him in the side.
Yeah,
But if it does, it'll be a nice little other storyline. Honestly, though, like as I said, I think most people would be a bit more excited about Lawler in terms of this year's production. Hopefully, he won't have as big as second year's blues, or hopefully Harley bounces back because, if he is in the side, I still wanted to do well. This might be an opportunity for him, but
hmm
I just think there's other midfielders that have got a reward. Like your Grosses, your Elijah Hewitts.
yeah,
Um, who have been at least putting more of a contest in, but just haven't finding the bodies. So, I actually reckon they've got probably a bit more right to get the, and I will put in quote unquote softer matchup because I don't think Richard's inside midfield is that bad, but compared to the other opposition midfields, it is a bit of a easier one for West Coast to try and set up their game against.
yeah. I agree. Hopefully, I mean, I'm hopeful we come away with a solid win. But if this is any sort of opportunity for West Coast to come out firing and have a much more improved offensive game, this is probably the time to do it currently. At least until they come up against
Absolutely.
North.
Yeah.
Um, Jumping over to the next game, which is over in Geelong, is the Cats versus the Giants. Probably another match of the round, honestly.
Mm. At Gumba. And it's sort of weird because it's like, it's almost as if, again, at Gumba, it's actually swinging a bit more towards the Giants just for their record at the stadium
Yeah,
because
they have a solid record
on
down there.
paper, yeah, as I said, like what we said about, the Giants, whether they've got enough attack to go against free flowing teams like Geelong like to be, who don't mind giving up turnovers, who don't mind conceding possession. They'll still always generate attack off it. Like
hmm
that's somewhere where Geelong really should be strong. However, this could also be a game where the Giants offense steps up a bit. And, I know what, as I said, I think Geelong's offense set up fairly well
hmm
in terms of their smartness in setting up attack. But, as I said, against the Cats defense, that might not be as imperative for the Giants. They might just be able to purely outmuscle. And again, not a strong ball winning midfield. It's all about shape outside the contest. And that's where the Giants might be able to grind out some pressure. So, yeah, this is a really 50-50 game. I'll probably side towards Geelong, but I do feel like, you know, it might be another one where it's like, how can we keep on not tipping the Giants at Goomba, considering how well they're going? I
Yeah,
do think this could be a game where they pull off another upset.
yeah, I definitely agree that either team is like very feasible in this matchup. I think with the Giants' record and the fact that they've still been putting in a decent output, they definitely have a strong chance. Again, as we mentioned during their breakdown, like they are missing Brent Daniels, and it is having a much more of an impact than we thought. Hopefully they're able to kind of tighten that up against Geelong, but Geelong have a really solid defensive output right now, especially Tom Atkins. He's putting in immense pressure on ball on every opponent that he has to
Mm.
touch, pretty much. And it's like, and their other defensive players as well are really, really solid at the moment. So it's just um, about getting their transition game going and just completely shutting down
Yeah.
Giants' methods of stopping their distribution.
Yeah. Well, I think I wouldn't say like defensively, but their burst off the halfback is very, very strong.
Mhm.
And like even though GWS can clamp down on them, I could actually see Geelong breaking a few lines against them. But as I said, I still think offensively GWS can get some good defensive matchups against them. Again, the Cats and talking about what they're missing, they still need Jack Henry back in order to me to like maybe think that GWS wouldn't or might get shut down a bit more.
hmm
Um, I don't think Jack Henry's back for this game. I haven't checked the injury list in
I'm
a
not
while,
entirely sure yet.
um,
I'm sure I'm not. He's
yeah,
not
you
too
know what I
far off.
mean. Yeah, so as I said, again, it is a chance for Hogan, it is a chance for Hadman. But if the Cats remain disciplined, keep solid on ground level, they can rebound and attack. And I think this is probably a chance for them to break their curse against GWS, but that same thing is also keeping the door ajar.
Exactly right. Yeah, in terms of tipping, this again 50-50 kind of game currently for both of us. Giants definitely have a solid sniff at it, and because of their record, they can definitely catch the Cats off guard. But again, yeah, Cats are disciplined. They get their game going. It should be smooth sailing for the most part for them. For me, I might just wait to see if there are any like major substitutions made at ins and outs. But I think I think Bedford fair chance he's probably not playing this week. But that's going to be hard for them because they'll miss their main tagger. But
Yeah,
it could still go either way, really.
I don't think they need a tagger for Geelong though. Like, who are you gonna
Bailey Smith.
like? Bailey Smith? I don't know, but like he's so grunt though. Like he's a meters game. Like it's not about accuracy anyway. So you tag him, his dispersions get a bit looser, but like they are anyway. So
Yeah, that is true.
I don't
know. Anyway, jumping over to the last match of the round. Yeah, I want to say this could be an interesting game because it's down in Hobart, but it's not going to be. North Melbourne versus the reigning premiers in Brisbane.
I think what we want to see is, I think the last few times has been absolute blowout. So any way North's able to defend, like if they keep Brisbane under 100, it will be a win. Ninja Stadium might add a few avenues to do that, but again, we saw a small lapse in North's midfield lose them the game against Essendon. And I think with the way Brisbane's midfield is, if they have that, they might be a bit, they might be put even further out of reach if they have that lapse. So, yeah, it's about, again, it's more about effort and how well, and even just converting when they do go forward.
Yeah.
They're not going to win the head-to-head midfield battle. They might win a couple of defensive matchups. They might keep one or two players quiet, but I can't see them not having a 3-goal player kicking. Okay, that's my weird prediction for the week. Brisbane's going to have a 3-goal plus player. You know what? We'll make it 4 goals because that 3 goals is a bit weak. We'll say Brisbane will have a 4-goal kicker.
Yeah, right.
In this matchup, I think they just have one loose matchup. I can't remember what my weird prediction was last week.
I've also forgotten.
I just like sending them.
It's fine.
I can only assume it was 100% correct as usual.
That's we'll go with that. We'll definitely go with that. I generally don't think it was, but I can't remember what it was anyway. So who knows?
Judging by my tipping, it probably wasn't. Yeah, I can't really think of one where it could have been.
That's all right. That is.
I hope it was Melbourne kicking 100 points against West Coast.
Might have been.
That would have been nice.
Might have been. You really should start writing these down, honestly.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'll check back on it. Maybe I'll go back on old episodes and try and figure them out. I'll keep a running tally. We'll keep that for next time.
All right.
Put that in. I'll update you next week.
Before we wind things down, the MRO report has come out for Sunday's games. I'm going to quickly run through the Battle of the Bridge MRO and the Hawthorn Richmond MRO. There was nothing from the Q Clash. However, there's a lot of players because there was a fair few brawls that happened over this day. So I'm going to start with Sydney and the Giants, with Jack Buckley and Hayden McLean both fined $1,000 for engaging in a melee. Lewis Melican got 3 matches for his hit on Toby Bedford, which I think is fairly accurate. I don't know if they'll fight it. I don't think they should because it was severe impact by contact.
It's so much like the other incidents. It's
it just wasn't concussion, but it was still a major injury.
Yeah.
Toby Green was fined $1,875 for engaging in a melee, and Dane Rampy was fined $1,000 for also engaging in a melee. Over on Hawthorn v Richmond, this is all in the second quarter. Majority of it's in the second quarter from the Sicily dump onto Maurice Rioli, which then Taranto went to defend and stand up for Rioli. Granted, it resulted in a 50-meter penalty and a goal for Sicily, but that's what it caused the melee in the first place. So I'm going to go through all the players who were fined from that. So I'm going to split this up just by how much they were fined by. So Josh Weddle, Jarman Impey, Seth Campbell, Jonty Fall, Toby Nankervis, Hugo Ralph Smith, Jacob Hopper, Tim Taranto, and James Sicily all fined $1,000 for instigating and or engaging in a melee. CJ was fined $1,875 for engaging in a melee. That same one. Same with Blake Hardwick, same amount of money. Jack Ginnivan and Nick Watson as well, same amount of money. There was a obscene gesture from Nick Watson in the third quarter, which cost him $1,000 fine. And then there was another melee in the fourth quarter, apparently, where Seth Campbell and Ryan Mansell were fined $1,000, and Blake Hardwick was fined $1,875 for also said fourth quarter melee. So
yeah, and a lot of the differences are just the difference between first and second offences.
Yes,
if you're
correct.
wondering out there.
Yeah, that's kind of how the structure goes. It slowly just climbs up and up as you get more and more offenses. I think there was one player that we saw that had like 4 or 5 offenses for something. Might have been tripping like 2 weeks ago, and he was paying like $5,000 or something, which was crazy.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so that's all from Sunday. In total, 18 different players were fined from Sunday alone, which I think is more than the entire weekend put together.
Yeah.
But there you go. That sums up round 8. So, thank you all so much for coming to listen, coming to hang out, coming to like, subscribe, comment on YouTube and on Spotify for episode 57 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. Reminder, episodes from this point onwards will be releasing at 1 p.m. AEST, 11 a.m. Perth time, 3 p.m. New Zealand time. Equate your time zone as you wish, wherever you are in the world. So episode 58 is going to be very exciting. Which should be all done, ready to go. Not that you all really need to know the BTS sort of stuff for it, but it's going to be recorded, edited, and uploaded all on the same day, ready to go live on the Wednesday, as I will not be home. I will be in Perth, hanging out with Cyric. It's going to be a great time. I don't have too much going on for this weekend. Again, as I said, I will be at the footy, but I'm also involved in another Overwatch tournament production. So those links will all be on my socials if you want to go check those out. Of course, with the footy game, I will also upload and post about that on the podcast socials. So please go check those out. I will be roots on for that. And yeah, that pretty much sums us up for the week. So once again, thank you all so much, and we will see you all next week for episode 58. Take care.